Gray is a funny-looking skeleton who betrayed his master and joined the human world, where he somehow became the strongest holy paladin. It all began in the year 11,266. An unjust war occurred in the kingdom of Isaac. The king of Isaac was attacking the continent of Celts, led by a woman named Irene. However, Irene and her men found themselves on the verge of defeat, and the king offered to let them live if Irene were to renounce her right to the throne of the house of Becker. Irene thought the king was speaking out of his ass at first, but when he claimed he won't break his oath in front of thousands of people, she decided to chicken out. Irene asked her men to lay down their arms and do as the Big Daddy said, but the soldiers were hell-bent on serving her till they met their maker. She argued that the fate of this battle was already decided and there was no need for further sacrifices, prompting the men to finally listen to her. After thanking her men for being so loyal to her till the very end, she stood up yet again and pledged to fight till the end, as she could not live with herself if she turned her back on her homeland. As she charged onto the battlefield all by herself, the king ordered his soldiers to take her down. Just then, they heard a voice in the background, and Irene seemed to recognize it very well. As she turned around, she noticed her maga simp Gray in his legendary knight armor, who was famous for taking out 100 men in a single blow. Alongside his squadron knights of the Silver Moon, Gray pledged allegiance to Irene and made an enemy of everyone who dared harm her. As he promised to fight for her honor to the death, he and his men charged into battle and submitted themselves as true paladins. Prior to this, in the peaceful port of the Celts, some guards show up and tell the people to get their asses out of there. Turns out an evil undead, like the ones in Dark Souls 3, has risen, which causes chaos among the residents. As they clear the market, the guards begin their search for this undead, who seems to be hiding behind some barrels. Just then, this funny-looking skeleton is startled by a talking cat who asks him why he's on the streets. After covering up the cat's face to prevent it from talking, the undead quickly realizes that it's not a talking cat, but rather a ghost possessing a cat's body. As they get acquainted, the cat is quick to realize that this stupid undead is on the ground for the first time, and asks him why he's not living in the abyss like every one of his kind. The undead says the abyss is a dangerous place, and one must possess some useful skill to survive there. However, he was a born loser, so he pretended to become a skeleton specimen to the great Lich Brutus to learn magic. The sorcerer was so dumb, he did not notice his existence for years, until one day, Brutus decided to transform the specimen into a skeleton soldier so he could make him run errands. However, the undead pissed his pants and decided to run away, but not before destroying some of Brutus's apparatus. Not only that, but he also stole some of Brutus' treasure, including a gold ring, meaning that the Great Lich is out to get him now. This is why he escaped to the abyss and arrived at the ground. The talking cat is shocked to its core upon hearing his story and tells him to go his separate way, as he doesn't want to get involved in his miserable life. However, the undead drags him back and asks him why the humans are out to destroy him when he hasn't done anything to them. The cat realizes that this idiot doesn't even know how the undead are perceived in the human world, and reveals that their kind is seen as death and calamity, who would do anything to cause disasters. The undead questions why the humans aren't after him, since he's a ghost as well, and he says it is because he has possessed a cat, which is a universally loved creature. However, the undead fails to understand why humans pamper cats so much, but not a walking skeleton like him, making the cat realize that this buffoon is helpless. Just as he takes his leave, the undead grabs him yet again and tells him that someone is entering through the man gate. Turns out it is Irene and her squadron of knights who have just entered the hamlet port. Irene comments on the strangeness of the city after seeing how all the houses are closed, but the guards show up and inform them of the situation regarding the undead. As they try to stop Irene and her squad, she bribes the guards by promising to put in a good word for them to Count Caspar, prompting them to clear the way. One of the knights asks his commander what's going on in the city, only to be told to not ask stupid questions, and that the port of Hamlet is about to change. The undead and the talking cat are watching this from behind the barrels, and the cat explains that these men are knights, who are considered the embodiment of justice and light. These knights bring justice to people, which is why people rally behind them. The undead is quite fascinated to learn about the knights, and when the cat asks him to return to the underground, he refuses and says that he will become a knight as well. This undead is none other than Gray, who will become one of the strongest and well-known paladins the world has seen. In the evening, Gray forces the talking Tom to accompany him and gathers a load of supplies that will help him become a knight. The cat isn't too convinced and says Gray will never be a knight simply by stealing an armor set from a smithy. However, Gray says he is already aware of that, which is why he has bought an idiot's guide to becoming a knight. The cat is extremely furious at the sheer idiocy of Gray and reminds him that one does not become a knight by reading a third-class novel. One needs a horse to even begin, and there is no horse in the world that would let a lich ride it. Gray is disappointed to learn the reality, but his spirit is not broken as he calls upon a great soul. Surrounded by a gust of wind and lighting, Gray manages to summon a Minecraft skeleton horse named Tenedos, who is shocked to see that he has become an undead. Meanwhile, Irene, the Duchess of Berbera, had finally arrived at Count Caspar's castle, who happens to be her uncle. After the formalities, Caspar drops a bombshell that he wants his son to marry Irene, and that is exactly why he has invited her here. However, Irene shows little interest and asks Caspar if he can help her inherit the Becker family's title. Caspar says that despite Irene's father's will, she might not be able to inherit the title because she has a brother who is an illegitimate child of her father. Irene says the man is simply a fraud, but Caspar refuses to acknowledge her and orders her to renounce her title so she can marry his son. He further says that the king agrees with the decision and Irene must do as she is asked. Irene quickly realizes Caspar's true colors and recalls how he made a vow to her father that he would remain loyal to him even after his passing. However, since Caspar has gone back on his word, Irene throws a handkerchief, which is a symbolic representation of initiating a duel. Meanwhile, the guards are still looking for Gray in the streets but are unable to find him. As he, Tenedo, and the talking cat hide in an alley, Gray decides to put on a knight's mask to conceal his undead identity. While the cat begs them to let him go, Gray ignores his pleas and tells Tenedos that they will need to make armor for him as well. The cat argues that they cannot become knights because knights are creatures of light, but Gray reminds him that he is able to produce holy light, which will allow him to join the light camp. After realizing that both Gray and Tenedos share the same malfunctioning brain cell, the cat wishes he would possess some other body before meeting them, prompting Gray to offer him an undead status. Hearing that, he quickly jumps back on his feet, stops complaining, and offers to assist Gray in becoming a knight, so he can get rid of him as soon as possible. Later, as the guards decide to call it a night, they come across Gray and Tenedos, who are now fully equipped in a knight's armor. Gray starts pissing his pants upon seeing them, but his disguise is so good that they don't even recognize him and simply tell him to stay off the streets as there is an undead looming around. After they leave, Gray praises himself for this brilliant disguise and also reveals that he is using magic to hold it together. With the armor covered, Gray sets his sights on finding a master who will train him to become an honorable knight. However, the cat has to sacrifice his brain cells to explain to him that people usually sleep at night. When he asks what they should do until sunrise, he tells him that they should head to the tavern where the knights usually hang out. Meanwhile, at the castle, Irene is set to duel Caspar the following morning, prompting his knight Horace to suggest resting for the night. Irene asks if he's worried because her decision was too impulsive, but Horace says it's because she agreed to unfavorable conditions for the duel. When Irene says Caspar would have never agreed to a fair fight, Horace aggressively suggests leaving the fort. However, Irene knows they have no choice but to take this duel since the king is planning on taking the Becker family's territory illegally and they won't stand a chance without Caspar's troops. Horace understands but still worries as Caspar has agreed to a turn-based battle between the two factions, and since they have only brought about 20 knights, they're bound to lose. However, Irene asks him to take her crest to hire a nearby mercenary group, and believes they can win if they deploy good tactics. She then asks her men to have faith in her and promises them the fruit of victory in exchange for their loyalty. Meanwhile, the undead squad arrives at the tavern and Gray recognizes this place as it's mentioned in the book he's reading. The cat asks him to act normal and order a glass of wine and a fish when he enters, stating that he must feed him in exchange for his help. As he enters, he is greeted by a chick with Fortnite chug jugs who takes him to the seat. Just then, a man asks his leader Paz if they can recruit this new face to their gang. Paz says that he doesn't let just anyone enter their group, the Red Scorpions, and that he will need to prove his worth first. On the other hand, Gray is ecstatic as the lady called him Mr. Knight, but the cat reminds him that it's common courtesy. He then asks if Gray has any money on him, prompting him to pull out a singular coin he took as a souvenir from Brutus. It will be enough to pay their bills for the night, but they will need to make more if they want to eat tomorrow. However, Gray notices some men gambling at the next table and proposes joining them so they can grab some quick cash. Sometime later, Paz and his guy notice people gathering around the gambling table as Gray is winning over and over again. Despite the talking Tom asking him to lose a few games to shake off the viewers, Gray is hell-bent on winning as much as possible. Just then, a punk Jacksepticeye challenges his luck and dares Gray to wager 10 silver coins at a time. Despite warnings from the cat, Gray accepts the challenge as he's certain he won't lose. Later, the two leave the tavern with loads of money, and Gray explains that probability is a fundamental knowledge in the world of liches, which is why he is so good at gambling. Just as the cat tells him that winning all the time can cause problems in the human world, the gang of gamblers shows up demanding their money back. The cat asks Gray to make a run for it, but Gray decides to hold his ground as he now has Tenedos by his side. As he mounts the horse, the gamblers try to gang up on him, only to get their ass handed to them by the vicious duo. After the dust settles, all the gamblers are biting the dust, and the only person that remains standing is Gray. As the regulars, including Paz, are all shocked to see so much power in one person, Gray reveals that he used buffing magic to enhance Tenedos' abilities. The next day, people are gathered in a camp where a tournament will be held featuring Count Caspar. People wonder how his fat ass will do in a fight, but they soon learn that Caspar will have his knights represented in the tournament. Paz, not wanting Gray on his team, takes him to the tournament and reveals that someone has paid a lot of money for them to participate in it. He believes that they will win easily if Gray joins them, and since only knights can participate in the tournament, they have been assigned temporary titles by the lady who hired them. Meanwhile, Caspar reminds Irene that she will lose a lot of fame if she were to lose. When he mentions the reputation of the Becker family, Irene sternly tells him to leave her family matters to her. She promises to keep her vow if she loses, but also wants Caspar to stand by his words if she were to win. Later, the announcer explains that the tournament will consist of infantry and cavalry battles, which will be fought in a turn-based format, just like every shitty RPG mobile game. Each side will send a knight to the battlefield, and the match will continue until elimination or forfeit. The winner must accept the challenge of the opposing knight, but they will have the choice to do a horse battle or foot battle. Once all the knights on one team are eliminated, the other team will be declared the winner. One additional condition is that Caspar will pledge allegiance to Lady Irene if she wins, but in case she loses, she must marry his son at a later date. The announcer then brings forward Caspar's team, which consists of hundreds of knights, while Irene's team only has a few dozen. The people start calling Irene a fool for playing the number game and even start betting on the count to win. Caspar uses this opportunity to mock Irene and says he won't defeat her too badly to protect her honor. Irene ignores the fat bastard and asks Horus if the mercenaries have arrived, prompting him to reveal that the men are waiting outside. Just then, the tournament begins and Irene's knights manage to win the first 2 rounds. When they lose the 3rd round, Horus is more petrified than a statue in Medusa's garden and asks Irene to let him fight. However, Irene asks Horus to hold his horses and bring out the mercenaries, making him realize she wants to use them to exhaust the Count's knights. As he heads outside, he notices a group of mercenaries and reminds them about the importance of this match. However, the mercenaries are only 40 in number and aren't sure if they can win against hundreds on the other side. Among these mercenaries is Gray, who asks Horus to grant him the title of a knight. Horus reminds him that he's already been made a knight by Lady Irene, but Gray demands a real title instead of a temporary one. Before Horus can show him his place, Irene herself shows up and reveals that the title of knight is only granted by merit. She then says that if Gray were to defeat 50 opposing knights in the tournament, she would grant him the official title of knight. While the cat asks Gray to refuse since this is too much, the man goes against him like always and happily accepts. With that, Irene wishes him the best of luck and returns to her chambers. The cat then asks him if he's lost his mind, but Gray is confident he can easily win because Tenedos can take on 100 men. However, the cat reminds him that everyone so far is fighting on foot, and for him to use his horse, he'll need to win a battle on foot. Turns out, Gray missed the memo and now he's royally screwed. While he contemplates what to do, Irene arrives in the chambers and Caspar mocks her for relying on the Red Scorpion mercenaries, blaming such lowly actions on the decline of her family. Just then, Paz is ordered to enter the ring, and with the swag of a Greek god, he faces his opponent and defeats him with ease. After he wins 5 rounds in a row, Caspar starts worrying about who this man really is, prompting his butler to reveal that Paz is the leader of the mercenaries. To break Paz's momentum, Caspar sends a giant barbaric warrior who not only scares the other mercenaries but also intimidates Irene and Horus. While Paz contemplates whether he should fight or forfeit, Gray is out there struggling to lift his sword. As the 12th match begins, the giant attacks Paz with tremendous strength. He uses his smaller size to maneuver around him and slice him up. However, Paz is shocked to see that the man is unaffected by his attacks and sends him flying with one swing. With Paz's defeat, the mercenaries lose hope, while Caspar sits proudly in his chair, knowing all too well what this win means for him. However, against all odds, Paz gets back on his feet, with his ribs having more cracks than Stoop Dog, and leaps at the giant with his broken sword. With one slash, he manages to blind the big guy and defeats him with one final blow. However, Paz is now spitting blood and is in no condition to fight, so Irene asks Horus to take him to the hospital. Meanwhile, Gray is still outside, plotting to craft a new weapon since his Butterfingers can't handle a sword. The cat asks him to hurry up because, after Paz's forfeit, the tournament might end sooner than they thought. As the night falls, the fight between the two sides continues with damage on both sides. After several deaths and injuries, Irene only had 6 fighters left, while Caspar's army, although weaker, had the advantage of having 61 members. As the fate of Irene hangs in the balance, Paz has somewhat recovered from his injuries and is watching the events unfold from a rooftop. He realizes that 6 against 61 are shitty odds and realizes that one can't win this battle simply with their brain. Just then, Horus shows up looking for him and complains that half of his men surrendered after his forfeit. Paz reminds him that they are mercenaries who are paid for fighting, but that does not mean they will throw away their lives for money. Despite being extremely frustrated, Horus keeps calm and asks Paz about the guy who boasted about defeating 50 knights. As Paz says he has no idea where Great is, another one of Irene's men is defeated, leaving only 5 participants standing. Horus realizes he's the only one who can fight at this point and rushes back to the arena, only to hear a loud thudding sound. As he turns around with terror on his face, he notices Gray holding a door 10 times his own size. Gray asks how many men are left on Caspar's team, but people are so shocked that they'd forget to answer. As Gray sternly asks them again, Caspar starts shitting his pants while Irene sees a glimmer of hope in him. Horus then tells him that there are over 50 men on the other team, and if he can defeat them, he can have the title of a knight. With enthusiasm, Gray slams his door onto the arena and stands on top of it menacingly, prompting the other guy to surrender. When the next contestant is called, Caspar's knights start arguing among themselves because they are too scared to face Gray. Just then, Caspar asks Gray how dare he destroy his palace's door and use it as a weapon. As the people start gossiping, Caspar learns from his butler that the knights have lost their morale and would rather give up their titles than face this monster. However, they might still have a chance if they change the mode of battle to cavalry. As Gray waits for his next opponent atop the palace door, Caspar himself steps into the arena and asks him to show his cavalry skills. Just then, Irene steps in and reminds him that only the winner gets to decide how the next match will be fought. Despite that, Caspar tells her that his men won't fight until there's a horse battle, which will just delay the tournament further. Caspar then asks Gray if he accepts a horse battle, and Gray agrees on one condition: that he sends all of his men at him all at once. He says he needs to defeat 50 men to get what he wants, and since he knows most of them will run away before even facing him, this is the best solution to his problem. While Horus thinks he's a crazy bastard on drugs, Caspar is more than happy to comply, unaware of the fact that Gray is much stronger with his horse. Sensing the urgency of this battle, Irene steps up and asks Gray if he is confident in his victory. When he assures her of victory, Irene's face lights up, and she prays for his win. Just then, Tenedos makes a badass entry into the arena, prompting Caspar's knight to rally up against him. The knights are naturally confident given there is a single person on the other side, and as one of them attacks him head-on, Gray swings his sword that goes flying into the air. The knights take it as an offense and charge him down, prompting Gray to use the secret technique of Lich. After he enhances himself in Tenedos, Gray manages to defeat several knights in quick succession, sending terror down the enemy's spine. As they try to injure his horse to stop his super speed, they quickly realize that Tenedos has been buffed with magic armor. Soon after, the whole arena is filled with defeated knights, and despite all odds, Gray has managed to win it for Irene. Just then, the lady herself arrives at the arena and returns his sword, prompting him to ask if she will fulfill her end of the bargain. Irene is more than happy to make him a knight, causing the whole crowd to erupt in cheers. This marked the birth of the great knight Gray, who was going to change the future of the whole world. Some people left the scene in anger, and some people cheered for the newly made knight. But one thing is for certain, everyone was impressed by his feat. Later in the night, Irene grants him the title Knight of the Silver Moon, given how it is said to bring luck, and also because they met under the silver moon. She apologizes for a modest ceremony, and hopes Gray will fight by her side till the end, and Gray promises to be by her side till the day he dies. He is then assigned a lavish room in the castle, and as soon as he is alone, he starts dancing like he's at a Spice Girls concert, celebrating his achievement of becoming a knight. However, he quickly realizes it is too soon to celebrate, as he needs to learn a lot more. As the cat tells him to shut up so he can sleep, Gray wakes him up as he needs his advice. He mentions how the knight in the book gives all his treasure to the poor people. But the thing is, he doesn't know what a treasure is and who these poor people are. The cat tells him that everyone except Casper is poor in this town, and the castle is full of treasures he can find. With that, the cat goes back to sleep, and the very next day, he finds Gray throwing gold coins to the public like he's some Japanese Robin Hood. Turns out, this idiot stole gold coins from the castle and is now distributing them among the poor. Meanwhile, Irene is in her temporary office when her knights Abby and Horace question Gray's motives. Irene says she could use someone as strong as him, but Abby argues that they don't know anything about Gray's past, which makes him dangerous. Despite his doubts, Irene asks him to trust her decision, but just then, another knight comes running in and reveals that Gray has robbed Casper's treasury. Irene is outraged about learning this and decides to pay him a visit. Before that, she starts reminiscing about her childhood when she would train under her father's wings. She never thought of herself as a competent lord, but one quality she had was her poker face, which would make her look calm in every situation. On the way to meet Gray, Irene shows her frustration about Casper not singing the charter and Gray trying to make her life a living hell, and imagines beating them both to oblivion. Meanwhile, Caspar and his guards show up at the castle roof, where the Count accuses him of stealing. Gray innocently says he's simply distributing the treasure among the poor, not realizing that it belongs to Caspar. He uses his goldfish brain and tells him that he should written his name on the coins, or how else would he know if they belong to him. As the two continue to argue, Irene sees this from afar and uses her keen insight to turn the situation in her favor. As Caspar refuses to indulge himself in a pointless argument with Gray and demands to see his master, Irene shows up with Abby and Horace and mocks him for avoiding her. Gray immediately greets her, which pisses off the Count even further. Irene then approaches the fat pig and reminds him that the breach of contract would give her the right to deprive him of his title, which makes the fatty doo-doo his pants. He assumes Irene deliberately sent Gray to rob his treasury. But Irene simply denies any connections to the incident and promises compensation for the troubles. Seeing her in a position of power, Caspar reluctantly signs the charter but tells her to get off her high horse as she still can't fight the king. As he leaves, Gray asks her if he's done anything wrong, but Irene praises him for giving her this opportunity. She reveals she had no right to deprive the Count of his title before she became the Grand Duke, but Gray's actions allowed her to play that bluff. However, she soon comes back to her usual self and tells Gray not to steal again, or she will have to deduct it from his salary. Furthermore, since they got what they wanted, there is no need for them to stay here anymore, which is why she asks Gray to pack up and accompany her to the White City tomorrow. As she makes her exit, Gray asks the cat what a salary is, but he is more focused on what kind of a maniac Irene is to have Gray on her side. The next day, the squad leaves for the White City, and when the night falls, they decide to set up camp between the mountains. After a while, a knight comes looking for Gray and tells him that Horace has demanded his presence in Lady Irene's tent. Meanwhile, Horace is furious in the tent and refuses to accept Irene's orders. She wants both Horace and Abby to visit different lords and use Caspar's character to make them join her side. However, Horace is worried that she will be left alone with Gray, who is untrustworthy and might harm Irene behind their backs. She has had enough of their worries and says that Gray is so strong that even if he wanted to harm her, there would be nothing they could do to stop him. Just then, Gray arrives at the tent and hears Irene asking them to act as messengers to expand their camp. As soon as he enters, he is met with death stares from both Horace and Abby, making him wonder if he's done something stupid again. However, they simply tell him they are counting on him for Lady Irene's safety while they are gone and leave the camp. However, Gray is so freaking stupid that he thinks Safety is the name of Irene's pet and even contemplates asking her where Safety is. Noticing his discomfort, Irene asks him if he is nervous, but Gray replies that he does not know what to do. She gums it down for him, stating that his job is to stand at the door and take down anyone who tries to attack her. After some time, Ari mentions how Gray hasn't taken his helmet off once and didn't even remember his oaths during his night-making ceremony, making her believe he is from a different country. When she jokes about Gray being inhuman, the man starts sweating despite only being a skull and bones, and Irene takes note of his reaction. However, she tells him not to worry about his past, as she is responsible for him from the moment he pledged his allegiance to her. As he promises to be loyal to her forever, she asks her to be ready to welcome some uninvited guests. Just then, a man in a purple robe enters the tent in order to execute Irene. This man is named Spectre, who belongs to a headhunter group called the Ravens. These Ravens usually take money to execute anyone from poor to royalties, but Spectre is a fearsome assassin who happens to be a fan of the Joker and targets people for fun.
Batman, I caught a little Pokemon.
As Spectre rushes in to attack Irene, Gray literally throws his sword in his face and knocks him down. As Spectre recovers from this unexpected tactic, Gray notices that his evil aura is much higher than that of the Great Lich, making him wonder if he's a necromancer of a veteran murderer. As Spectre rushes him down at tremendous speeds, Gray finds himself decimated before he can even react. Spectre starts laughing like a maniac, thinking that he's won, but his victory is short-lived as Gray laughs back at him and makes him realize that his sword is broken into pieces. For a moment, Gray was actually scared that he might have been cut to pieces, but thinking that Spectre lied to him, he starts slapping him like an angry Karen. As Spectre gets his teeth knocked out of his mouth, Irene can't help but be surprised at the sheer idiocy of both of them. She had realized that Spectre broke his sword on the first attack, and then continued to swing like a dumbass, but Naughty nor Gray realized that until the very end. Regardless, she tells Gray to give this sorry bloke the boot, but Gray asks if she already knew if an assassin was coming for her. Irene reveals that this is an average Tuesday for her, and her rivals send assassins her way every 3 days, much to Gray's shock. She figures Gray had no idea about her situation and only joined her to become a knight, so she thinks it's best if she explains the situation to him. She reveals that her father, the Grand Duke of the Becker House, passed away unexpectedly and left a will that his only child, which was Irene, will inherit the title and the property. However, a man named Jones, who claimed to be an illegitimate son of the Duke, appeared and demanded the rights. According to the law, an illegitimate son had no right to inheritance, but the main problem was that Jones was brought out by the king, who is basically above all law. He had the power to grant Jones anything he wanted, which included the right to inherit the Becker family. This was an obvious conspiracy against Irene, who realized that the king wanted to take control of the Becker family in a non-lethal manner. Many people were afraid of the power the king held and refused to help even when they knew it was unjust. Others saw this as an opportunity to make a living and help the feudal lords take advantage of the situation. All in all, ever since the Duke passed away, people wanted his 16-year-old daughter to disappear from the world. Hence, assassination became a routine for her. After explaining her story, Irene and her squad finally arrive at the White City, the capital of Becker. As the city prepares to welcome her, a noble blonde is watching this from her window and shows interest in meeting this new knight that Irene found during her visit to the port. As Irene enters her city, people seem to already be aware of this legendary Silver Moon Knight, who is rumored to outmatch 100 knights. The cat asks Gray if he understood anything Irene said to her last night, but Gray is still unfamiliar with many words of human language, such as illegitimate son or inheritance, meaning he still has no clue what he is up for. However, one thing he is sure of is that he will have to fight the king one day and defeat him to keep his title. As he takes a look around the city, he notices how lively the place is and how much people respect him for protecting their leader. Irene says the liveliness of this place is what is so dear to her, which is why she must protect it from falling into the king's hands. She further says she wants to reward Gray with new armor and a warhorse and asks if he has a specific requirement. She explains to a terrified Gray that he is an important part of the Becker family and his attire must stand out, which is why they will need his weight, proportions, and other things to make sure his armor fits. Additionally, Irene needs to invite nobles to a ball to tell them that she's returned safely, and since Gray has been promoted to a guardian knight from here on out, he must attend the party with her. Meanwhile, a white angelic woman is flying in the sky and notices an immature lich among the people, who happens to be none other than Gray. However, despite confirming Gray's identity as an undead, she is asked not to take any action as per the Greystone Agreement. which refrains them from harming liches unless they mutilate humans. At night, Gray is delighted to see his bright shining armor delivered to his room, and Irene is so generous with him that the armorer only measured the previous armor's shell size and made the new one without Gray having to remove it. The cat then reminds him that he still has to attend the ball, and as expected, the illiterate undead has no idea what that is. The cat explains that a ball is sort of a party where everyone dances, but the man doesn't even know what dancing is. The cat then demonstrates some of his sick moves, and the two start dancing like they're auditioning for a bad reality TV show.
Bruh. What the dog doing?
Just then, they hear a knock at the door, and Gray quickly jumps into the new armor to answer it. He finds Irene's maid on the door, who informs him that the lady is waiting for him. As she guides him to Irene, Gray develops an extra bone in his body upon seeing her sheer beauty. However, in reality, he is a Giga Chad who is getting excited over the high-quality fabric she is wearing. She then asks Gray if he is ready and lends out her hand so he can help her get downstairs. Gray, being all bones and no brain, does not understand the gesture and asks the cat for help. After he finally holds her hand, he compliments her gown and asks if he can wear it. She questions her choice of fashion considering he's a man, but he doesn't even know what a man is. Gray almost reveals his identity, until the cat knocks some senses into him, prompting him to ask Irene to forget about this conversation. However, given how Gray refuses to take his armor off and doesn't like talking about his past, Irene wonders if Gray's got more estrogen than she initially thought.
Bruh.
Nevertheless, the duo rides at the ball, and while everyone bows in respect, they can't help but gossip about Gray, who's achieved so much fame in a matter of days. Irene then welcomes everyone to the hall and aims to not only improve her relations with the attending families, but also resolve the previous issues regarding their family name in one meeting. As she sips her wine, Shelley, the same noble blonde from before, mocks his granddad for being the one who disagrees with Irene. Gray asks Irene who that man is, and she introduces him as Gregory III of Atwood, who possesses immense wealth and a great military force, both of which are essential in their battle against the king. Unfortunately, Gregory has already denied her request for aid, but since he is here tonight, it means there might be a chance to win him over. Just then, Irene walks up to Gregory and asks him for a dance, hoping to woo her away into his pockets and pants if necessary. As Gray starts following her like the good puppy that he is, Gregory's granddaughter, Shelley, tells him not to interfere in their dance. She thinks Gray wants to dance with someone and asks if he will join her. The cat suspects the woman is being clever and asks Gray to keep his distance, but Gray is an idiot and takes the most literal meaning of those words. When Shelley starts crying thinking Gray has rejected her, the cat quickly figures out she's trying to make a scene and asks him to compliment her. Despite not wanting to lie, he is forced to call her the baddest, beautiful woman in the world and agrees to dance with her. However, it was all part of her grand strategy to hit the sheets and wants to see what Gray is hiding under that helmet. However, the cat isn't too worried as he knows she will regret making Gray dance with her. As they begin their dance, Gray keeps stepping on Shelley's feet and apologizes, stating it is his first time dancing. As he and Shelley enjoy their not-so-elegant dance routine, Gregory takes note of Gray and questions why he is still wearing that armor. Irene mentions that it is simply a habit of his and then asks him if he would reconsider his decision regarding her request. Gregory says he has no doubt Irene is more than capable of becoming a lord, but his family tradition of only supporting the stronger party prevents him from lending her a hand. Meanwhile, as Gray gets the hand of dancing, Shelley asks him if he would like to take a walk with her. After he agrees, the two leave the hall and Shelley, being the pick, shows him the strain on her foot which came from Gray stepping on her. When Gray apologizes, she asks him to find some medicine and apply it for her. The cat quickly realizes that Shelley is trying to flirt with Gray, but Gray ignores him and heals her foot with magic, much to Shelley's surprise. Just then, a man with a bouquet and a broken heart arrives at the scene and sees Gray holding Shelley's foot. Thinking of him as a shameless bastard, he challenges him to a duel, but the cat asks him to dissolve this situation because he belongs to the same family Irene is trying to win over. Meanwhile, the white angelic lady notices Gray's diving magic abilities and finds it rather interesting. Irene and Gregory hear some disturbance outside, and just then a knight comes running in and informs her that Gray has insulted Lady Shelley of the Gregory family. Heading outside, the man who showed up with the bouquet accuses Gray of humiliating Shelley and even urges Shelley to tell everyone what he did to her. However, Shelley tells him he's got the wrong idea and that Gray was only trying to heal her foot. However, the man thinks she's being kind and argues that no medicine in the world is capable of healing this fast, as he doesn't see a scar. When he says Gray must have deceived her, the people start gossiping about him. He urges Gray to explain himself or he will not only lose his title but also his reputation. Just then, Irene arrives with Horace and Gregory and asks them what's going on. While Gray is clueless because he does not understand words, the other guy says he saw Gray trying to get in Shelley's pants. While Gregory is furious, Irene asks him to hold his horses and let the others explain what they saw. She asks Gray first, who reveals he had injured Shelley's foot during their dance, and he was simply trying to heal it. When Shelley asks him to use the same magic he did earlier, he needs to recover before using it again. Turns out, his hand was burned off after using divine magic, and in reality, it will take him several days to recover. If he were to burn off his other hand as well, he would be unable to control the armor, which in turn would expose his identity. The man then accuses him of lying and assumes that Gray must have threatened Shelley to lie on his behalf, leaving Gregory disappointed. However, Irene says he has full faith in her knight and will get to the bottom of this, promising to punish the guy who is slandering the reputation of her knights. Gregory is furious and leaves the ball after asking Irene to stay out of his family matters. The next day, the White City welcomes the army of Count Felder, who has agreed to aid Irene in her cause. With the military of 3 counts under Irene's command, Horace seems to be confident in their position. However, Irene is taken aback by this sudden development and smells something fishy. She then asks about the man who accused Gray of harassing Shelley, and Horace reveals that the man is Matthew of the Modine family, who has a crush on Shelley and accused Gray out of jealousy. With that, Irene and Horace head down and welcome Felder to their city. After greetings, Felder asks if Gregory has made a decision yet, and when Irene tells him what happened, he suggests tying him up and beating him into submission. When Ernie politely asks him to do no such thing, he gives her a playful smack and says that he's only joking. However, he mentions that some people do not care about reasoning and will only make a decision when they are desperate. Just then, Irene notices a wagon in the background, and Felder reveals his son Jimmy is traveling in it. He explains that Jimmy has been sick lately, and the doctors have advised him to stay away from sunlight, hence the wagon. When she approaches the wagon to meet Jimmy, the boy turns out to be a sinister-looking boy with white hair, much like her own. However, she overlooks that and apologizes to Jimmy for making him and his father travel so far. After that, Irene asks his uncle to come inside and rest, since they have traveled a lot. Later in the evening, Horace and Abby are in Irene's office discussing how their situation has improved a lot with help from Count Felder. When Irene does not show any interest in the matter, Horace asks her to speak her mind, prompting her to mention the convenient timings of Felder's arrival. She also mentions how Felder's son, although very cute, looks nothing like him and even has white hair. Meanwhile, Matthew visits Felder and explains how he never expected Irene to offend the Gregory family and take her knight's side. Begging for another chance, he promises Felder that he will do whatever it takes to remove Gray from the Bicker's camp. Meanwhile, Gray is in his room making a list of things he wants to do as a knight. He recalls all the vows Irene made him take during his ceremony and reveals that whenever liches swear on something, they must do it. This is why he needs to keep up with those vows and starts by deciding to help anyone who asks for his aid. Donning his armor, he leaves for the town, but much to his surprise, he is met with hostility from the people who think low of him after the incident with Shelley. As people throw loads of tomatoes at his face, the cat explains that some people have started spreading false rumors about him in the city. However, Gray doesn't give a single damn about these people, stating that if they don't care enough to find the truth, their opinion ain't worth. Heading into the local market, when he is met with hostile eyes, the cat asks him to be a teacher's pet and rat the people out to Irene. Just then, a boy with crocodile tears and dirt on his face comes running to him for help. And since that's what he wants to do anyway, Gray agrees to help immediately. Soon after, Shelley is in her wagon when the driver tells her that they should take the other road as this one is blocked by the crowd. When she asks what's happening, the driver mentions that the commotion is caused by the Silver Moon Knight. Meanwhile, the little boy tells Gray that some gangster kidnapped her sister and demanded that he must bring the Silver Moon Knight to them in exchange for her release. The cat asks Gray to reconsider, as this is obviously a trap. However, this is exactly why Gray wants to face these kidnappers. Upon arriving at the location, Gray and Tenedos are both weirded out to see that they have to face a bunch of kids led by the one named Nania. When the boy demands her sister back, Manhwa throws her off a height, prompting Gray to rush to her rescue. After catching the girl, he questions if the kids plan on attacking him without weapons, but just then, the boy who called for his help and Manhwa both start shouting that Gray has kidnapped a girl. Even the girl is in on this and starts shouting for help, making him realize he is in some deep. Soon after, the locals start attacking Gray, and even the people who gave him the benefit of the doubt earlier are now convinced that he is a horrible person. On the other hand, the boys who trapped Gray run back to the alley and are super excited since they will be paid a lot of money and their father won't have to work so hard. However, Shelley and her driver hear this and ask the boy who offered them money in exchange for this act. Meanwhile, Gray and his cat are talking a walk of shame like Cersei Lannister, and are forced into the castle where Irene will judge them. However, Shelley and her guards stop them along the way, and the people start gossiping about how kind she has been to commoners like them. Shelley jokingly asks if they are holding some kind of an event, but the man tells her that they are punishing the knight who insulted her. However, when she says they are mistaken as Gray merely helped her, the man says everyone has been talking about it in the city and Gray was even caught harassing a little girl today. She asks to speak with the girl, and when she is presented in front of Shelley, she cleverly takes the wig off to reveal that it is a boy posing as a girl. The whole crowd is shocked by this revelation, and Shelley asks her guards to bring out the other kids as well. She then says these kids are just the victims of rumors, and makes them admit that this whole thing was just a prank. After she clears Gray's name in public, she tells the people that Gray is not only a knight, but also a part of the baronetcy, and by tying him up like this, they have insulted the Baron himself. This means that Gray has the right to sanction these people, and when he uses that right, the people start begging him for forgiveness. However, Gray menacingly tells them that a punishment must come their way, which just so happens to be a sign telling the people that he is an honorable knight. Shelley bursts into laughter upon hearing this, and the people, who know they have been let off, easily agree to do as asked. On the other hand, Felder is disappointed in Matthew for wasting his second chance. After the commotion is dissolved, Gray thanks Shelley for stepping up to save his sorry ass. She says she was merely returning the favor and urges him to discuss the matter with Irene. She also reveals that the person responsible for throwing dirt on his name is none other than Matthew of the Modine family, the same guy who was after him on the ball night. Shelley believes Matthew wants to alienate him and Irene, so she suggests they do a background check on the guy. The cat suspects something fishy, because Shelley's grandfather refused to help Irene and pushes Gray to ask her why she is helping them. When he does so, she says that she is risking dragging her family into a war, but since Gray is a miserable clown, she is fine with taking the chance. With that, she parts ways with Drag and heads to the theater. However, in a matter of seconds, Matthew shows up from the dark and restrains her, stating that despite him going out of his way to keep her out of the war, she went ahead and helped the night, which ended with his lord abandoning him. He says the only way for him to redeem himself is to eliminate the Silver Moon Knight, and orders him to decimate his own limbs in exchange for Shelley's safety. Shelley is certain this won't work, because there is no way Gray would do that for her, but despite that, Gray pulls off his left arm, much to everyone's horror. Before Matthew can absorb the shock, Gray uses this opportunity to throw his arm at his face and knocks him out. He then reveals that he retracted his arm back into the armor to make it look like he cut his arm, when in fact, he merely cut his gauntlet. As the guards restrain Matthew, Shelley thanks Gray for saving her life, but Gray says it's no big deal as anyone in his position would do the same. Matthew is furious upon getting caught, but hints at the fact that Gregory's life is in danger and she will be holding his corpse very soon. In the night, Gregory finds himself restrained by a bunch of thugs, who not only raided his mansion but executed every guard in it. As their leader intimidates him by playing Fruit Ninja with him, he mentions that they are all alone in the mansion, which means they will have plenty of time to talk. After some playing with the Food Act, the leader gets to the point and says Gregory needs to write a letter to the fief asking them to send troops to support the Becker family. Gregory is certain Irene did not send these thugs, and despite the death looming over his head, he refuses to do as asked. When the leader threatens to execute him, Gregory shows no fear as he understands how strong his position is in this case. Even if they were to execute him, his son will inherit his title according to the will, which is proved by the Archbishop, meaning even the king can't interfere with it. He also figures it was Felder who sent these thugs to threaten him and mock his choice of men. Meanwhile, in Irene's castle, she and Felder are about to discuss the distribution of troops. Before they can start, a knight enters the room and informs Felder that a messenger is waiting for him outside the castle. As he leaves the room, Irene gets suspicious and asks Abby to send a spy of their own to follow Felder's messenger. Outside, Felder receives a letter from his men that Gregory has figured out he sent them after him, but despite that, he tells his guide to go back and continue as planned. As he returns to Irene, she asks what the matter is, but Felder brushes it off as a trivial matter with the fiefdom. However, Irene reveals that due to the threat of war, their city has been under martial law, meaning the city gates are closed at night. She asks him how his messenger managed to enter the city, leaving Felder speechless. Back in the Gregory mansion, the thugs wait for their messenger to show up, but they are surprised by Shelley's appearance. As Shelley enters the main hall with Gray's cat, she is surprised to see the lights turned off, and is annoyed that no one came to greet her. However, before she can assess the situation, Shelley is restrained by the bandit leader, who throws her right next to Gregory. The man then admits he can't harm Gregory because he needs him to write that letter, but nothing is stopping him from having some fun with Shelley. Gregory is fuming like a boiling kettle and threatens to chop his sausage if he ever so lays eyes on her. However, the man knows these are empty threats and proceeds to grab Shelley from the floor. He then removes the tape from her face because torturing would not be fun if he couldn't hear her voice. However, Shelley couldn't care less because, in her book, a toddler's threats pack more punch than his. When she mocks him for being a bad guy, he literally claps the wind out of her cheeks and knocks her down. Despite his threats to give Shelley a mini Shelley, the woman remains as stubborn as ever. Just then, the talking Tom steps in and scratches the man's face, followed by him summoning Gray inside the house. Before Shelley walked directly into the trap, Gray escorted her to the mansion and immediately figured something was wrong because all the lights were off. Gray wanted to rush in and save Gregory, but Shelley informed him that there were a lot of rooms in the mansion, and they would be in a lot of trouble if they didn't locate his location first. To increase their chances of success, Shelley decided to enter the mansion alone and let the kidnappers think they had the upper hand. Gray asks Shelley to take his cat with her, and when the cat asks what he is planning to do, Gray hands him an amulet he stole from the Great Lich. This amulet allowed Gray to teleport to its location after the cat slammed it onto the ground. As the bandit leader is left in shock, Shelley is certain Gray has some sort of a connection with the Holy Spirit. As Gray sanctions them in the name of the Holy Spirit, the white angel who has been observing him for a while sneezes, hinting at her own connection to the said entity. The guards are well aware of Gray's identity, but had too much coffee this morning and rushed him down in hopes of outnumbering him. After dodging an incoming attack at the very last second, Gray once again throws his sword like a freaking idiot and uses a technique called Illuminating Beam Chain to defeat all of his opponents. After Gregory and Shelley are rescued, the old man replays the whole thing in his head, from Gray's sudden appearance to the illuminating chains. He is certain that Gray is using magic and reveals how the only person in the world who can freely use magic is the Holy Order's Paladin. Assuming Irene called in a favor from the Holy Order, Gregory can't help but wonder why she kept this news private. This urges him to re-examine the Becker family's abilities, which might also change his mind about what side to take during the upcoming war. Meanwhile, Gray asks Shelley what he should do with these thugs, and Shelley tells him to leave it to her. She then addresses the leader by his name Eddie, which surprises him. Shelley reveals she's read too many Sherlock Holmes novels and proceeds to reveal Eddie's address along with his family members. When he begs her not to harm his family, she says she has nothing against them and is only mentioning this because if she can get information about him, so can the man who sent him. And since he has failed this critical mission, Eddie's family might be in danger from his own employer. As Eddie realizes his messed up situation, Shelley gives him two choices. One is to reveal the man who sent them, and the second one is to die here to protect their family. Eddie says his family will be doomed the moment he decides to go against his employer and asks her to not harm his family. He then bites the poison capsule he had hidden under his teeth and dies on the spot. Just then, Gregory notices that the Becker family, with a whole squadron of knights, has arrived at their mansion to check up on them. He figures they must have followed the messenger who brought the letter from Felder and decides to talk to Irene himself, possibly because he now wants to help her against the king. Meanwhile, Irene asks Felder if he wants to come clean, but this man just refuses to back down. When Irene says she did not authorize the use of force against the Gregorys, he replies she didn't oppose it either. As Irene shows her disapproval regarding Felder's ways, he claims he is putting himself at risk by supporting her and that she should be thankful to him. Irene leaves the room in frustration, and Abby is furious because this act by Felder puts dirt on their name. He asks Irene to not be polite to him, but she tells him to stay calm as they can't risk an inner conflict at this stage of the war. She then inquires about Gregory's health, and Abby tells her that the Silver Moon Knight, after being targeted by Felder, managed to find the old Count's place and rescue both him and Shelley. Abby also reveals that Gregory is waiting for them in the lounge, prompting Irene to head straight to him. Once there, they discuss Felder's situation and Irene explains that he did what he did to intimidate the Gregory family. However, when she says she worries that Felder might be the king's rat, Gregory reveals that this matter could have caused civil unrest, which would give the king an excuse to send troops here. When he asks why she suspects Felder, Irene reveals it's because he brought his only child to the city who looks nothing like him. His white hair is extremely rare in the kingdom, and only the Becker family has such traits in their bloodline. They suspect that Jimmy is the illegitimate son of Irene's father, but they cannot understand why Felder would risk bringing him here. Meanwhile, Felder enters Jimmy's room, who's watching the red moon like a big shot villain, and asks Felder why he's visiting him this late in the night. In a surprising twist, Felder takes a knee to Jimmy and apologizes for disturbing him at this hour. Jimmy then asks why he's here, and Felder reveals that the Silver Moon Knight has sabotaged all of their plans since the beginning of Port Hamlet. Felder explains that Gray has popped out of nowhere, and even though he acts like a child, he is quite powerful and resilient. What makes him annoying is his loyalty towards Irene, which is why they need to make him vanish. Understanding the trouble Gray has been causing, Jimmy reveals his vampire form and decides to take this matter into his own hands. Just then, the angel named Catherine, who has been observing Gray, takes note of the situation and asks for permission to dispose of Jimmy. However, her master tells her not to get involved until Jimmy harms a human. The angel is frustrated and blames her master for being too overprotective of these deviants, but he reminds her that they have to follow the agreement to avoid chaos. However, Catherine has a bad feeling that more and more demons will show up in the human world if they continue to follow this agreement. The next day, Irene, Felder, and Gregory are discussing more strategies, and Felder comments that they can widen their defense line due to the addition of Gregory's army. However, Gregory is still not over the fact that Felder tried to threaten him and wants to stay clear of his men. As they engage in a mock battle, little Jimmy comes running into the room and Felder swings him around like a father does to his son in an Oscar-worthy performance. Jimmy says his father hasn't given him any playtime ever since he got here, but Felder says he is super busy and he should find someone else to play with. Jimmy cleverly points at Gray and takes him to the underground segment of the castle. Once they arrive in the dungeon, Gray questions Jimmy's choice of playground, unaware of the fact that Shelley has joined them too. When Jimmy says she didn't invite her to play, she simply says she was too bored in the meeting and wanted to play as well. Jimmy brushes her off and explains the game called The Brave and the Dragon. A long time ago, an evil dragon was living in the dungeon and kidnapped a princess with white hair, which led to the wrath of the locals. Eventually, a brave warrior rose from the people and executed the dragon. Just then, Jimmy uses a magic technique called the Eye of the Illusionist and assigns the warriors and the dragon's roles to Shelley and Gray respectively. Jimmy then declares them mortal enemies and orders them to fight each other to death for the princess. However, the tension in the air is dissolved in a split second as Gray, in his senses, says that he wants to be the dragon instead. Jimmy is shocked to see his trick fail, revealing that only those with higher magic than him are immune to it. Turns out the cat is the one who's been affected by the illusion, prompting him to smack Gray into the ground. Realizing it was just a mishap, Jimmy tries to use the trick again, only to realize that it really does not work on Gray. Just then, Shelley, who is under hypnosis, arrives with a brick in her hand and calls Jimmy the princess. Since the princess had white hair in Jimmy's story, he is the one who's been assigned that role automatically due to his white hair. While Gray is busy dealing with the cat, Shelley walks up to them and knocks them both out. Afterward, she turns her attention toward Princess Jimmy, and it is said that the screams of a certain teenager echoed the dungeons all day long. Sometime later, as doctors rush to Shelley's room, Irene asks Gray why she fell into a coma after going on a trip with him and Jimmy. Gray says it is not just Shelley, but the cat has also been unconscious, and he can't figure out what the reason is. As they contemplate what to do, Abby returns with the doctor's report and reveals that they were affected by black magic, which can only be treated by a priest from the church. Irene immediately suspects Jimmy and realizes that Gray wasn't affected thanks to the protection of the Holy Spirit. making him the perfect candidate to deal with Jimmy. Meanwhile, a female vampire named Dora flies into Jimmy's room, only to find him crying like a When she asks who bullied the little guy, Jimmy says he was threatened by a girl with a brick who even hugged him in front of the public. Feeling embarrassed, Jimmy vows revenge on Shelley, but Dora makes fun of him for acting like a girl. Furious, Jimmy blames Felder for dragging him into the mess and worries that Shelley will find out his secret if he is not careful. While Jimmy is fuming like a hot kettle, Dora tells him not to worry too much as she is more than ready to eliminate anyone he wants. However, Jimmy gives her the housewife treatment and reminds her that they cannot take the initiative as per their agreement with the Holy Spirit. He further says how his actions have been a little suspicious, meaning some angel might already be observing him. As he discusses his plan to eliminate Gray, he takes his sip of the blood Dora brought him and immediately spits it out. Turns out the blood reeks of alcohol, prompting Dora to reveal she can only take out blood from drunkards as it draws less suspicion. She further reveals how things are so strict that the Northern Blood clan has not shifted to pig blood for survival. Jimmy is shocked to hear this and vows to revive the Great Blood Race once again. Just then, Prade shows up in his armor and reveals he's been asked to play with him as per Irene's orders. He also says the game they played the last time was too dangerous, and now they'll be playing a new game where he will be Jimmy's sugar daddy. As Gray removes the curtains from the windows, his whole room is filled with sunlight, and unlike the vampires of the Twilight trilogy, Jimmy is on the verge of being burnt to a crisp. Gray realizes Jimmy's discomfort and shuts the curtains once again. However, he still wants to play the Big Daddy and asks Jimmy to prepare himself for a tour of the city. Despite his protests, Gray is hell-bent on following Irene's orders and punches a hole in the wall simply with the wind force. He says he has permission to disciple Jimmy by beating him up, so if he refuses to leave his room, who knows what will happen. Jimmy is naturally terrified of Gray's sheer strength and agrees to go horse riding. As they roam around the city, he notices some kids arguing with each other. These are the same kids who tried to frame him for harassing a girl, and the boy who led him to the trap steps and apologized to him for setting him up. These children are all orphans raised by the church, and when the city started preparing for war, the church eventually ran out of funds. This is why the kids tried to frame Gray for a small profit, but instead of punishing them, Gray donated all of his belongings to the church, which earned him the respect. Gray says it's no big deal as he was simply doing what a knight should do, but since no one else ever gave a damn about these kids, they are inspired by Gray want to become knights when they grow up. Gray, being the idiot that he is, says there is no need to wait until they grow up and suggests creating a knightly order with them. As he takes them back to the church, he introduces his brand new son Jimmy to the kids, who express their wish to be adopted by him. Gray probably doesn't even understand what the word means and claims that all of them are his sons from now on. Returning to the church, he tells the pastor that he wants to make these kids knights. The man, thinking Gray is merely playing, asks him to come inside the church. As Gray steps inside, his life flashes before his eyes as he sees the angel Catherine praying. Following that, Gray makes the kids say the vows to become a knight and pledge his allegiance. He then grants them the sacred title of knight and promises to protect them for as long as they keep their oath. While the kids are ecstatic, he promises to arrange horses and armor and start their training tomorrow. However, they still need to think of a name for their knightly order. While they are at it, Gray puts his brain cells on his current state, thinking how he can't believe how he got here so fast. In reality, this is all a ruse to distract himself from the fact that he is in the room with an angle that can wipe him out in an instant. Gray starts panicking and looks for a way to escape, only for Catherine to speak out and say that she won't harm him as long he doesn't hurt anyone. She says she is just curious and wants to have a chat with him, prompting them to sit awkwardly on a bench like an arranged marriage couple. She then asks Gray why he wants to become a knight, knowing all too well it does not fit with the teachings of a lich. Gray, with the enthusiasm of a teenager, says it's super cool to be a knight, and he gets to meet legends every day. Not only that, but he also gets a lot of respect from people, which is the best thing for him. Although Catherine thinks it is a knave reason, she says being a knight may sound cool but is not so easygoing. One day, Gray might lose the respect of these people and his lord might start questioning his decisions, which will only make him miserable. When she asks if he would still enjoy being a knight in those conditions, Gray, being an ultimate Tier 3 simp of Irene, bolts out of there claiming Lady Angel should get to know Irene first before making speculations. As he's about to leave, the pastor comes running at him and thanks him for his help. He says the kids were super naughty before, But now they are reading the holy book on their own, all thanks to Gray. As he earns the respect and approval of the Holy Order, he questions if the pastor will apply him for the Holy Order's seal of cross. The pastor, however, wants Gray to give further donations to the church, prompting him to rush to the tavern. Later in the night, Dora visits Jimmy and notices that he is absolutely exhausted thanks to his trip with Gray. When she asks what happened, Jimmy starts ranting like a girl on her period, explaining everything Gray put him through. As Dora holds back her laughter, Jimmy bursts into tears, prompting her to give him a hug. Since Gray is being too much of a nuisance, she asks Jimmy if they should take the throne by force, but Jimmy says they will have to endure it for the sake of the rival of the blood race. Meanwhile, Gray is in the tavern winning big money, and as he leaves with a bag full of silver coins, an old drunkard comes to him and asks him to give his money back. Gray gives him 100 silver coins to shoo off, but some other gamblers use this as an opportunity to get free money out of him. Given how much of an idiot he is, Gray is left with only 2 silver coins and decides to donate them to the church. Once he gets there, he is greeted by his training knights who decided on the name Super Invincible Order of the Silver Moon, and even spent all night creating a banner. The kids are ready to train until one of them asks if Gray's son is coming or not, prompting Gray to go back to the castle and fetch Jimmy. A few days later, Dora visits Jimmy once again, who is more depressed than an average American, and lists the things Gray put him through the past few days. Having enough of his torture, Jimmy asks Dora to tell the king to send his troops, prompting her to remind him of what he said earlier. Frustrated, Jimmy yells out that the situation has changed, and he would rather take the throne by force than be tortured to death. A few days later, a messenger reveals that King Baird has gathered his army near Lion's capital, and is heading towards the border of the Duchy of Becker. Meanwhile, Jimmy's torture continues, prompting the king to take drastic measures to reach the White City, leaving Irene, Felder, and Gregory confused. After some time, Dora visits the king again and asks him to hurry it up. Baird argues that they will be exhausted by the time they reach the city, but Dora bribes him with the power of immortality, which leads him go through swamps and snowy weather to reach his destination. Meanwhile, in the White City, Irene has put on her battle suit and is ready to address her subjects. Once she motivates her men to protect their homeland, Felder is distracted to see a bunch of kids in the army. Just then, his fellow knight Mike reveals that these kids are brought by the Silver Moon Knight and are a part of his order. As the kids pose like the Caesar X Squad to make their presence known, Felder can't help but be shocked at the absurdity of this situation. Later, Felder reports this to Irene, and Gray is summoned alongside his order to explain the situation. Irene asks if their parents have given their consent for them to march into battle, but the kids reveal they are orphans, and the pastor has agreed to let them be under Gray's command. Seeing their enthusiasm, she says she looks forward to seeing them in action, but politely asks them to leave the room as she has to discuss something with Gray. As soon as they leave, Irene asks Gray to send these sorry losers back to the church. When he argues that they are a part of his order, Irene says she can't let a bunch of kids die on a battlefield. When Gray says he will protect them, Irene questions if he is even aware of what a war is like, which ignites an argument between the two. Later in the night, Gray is out of his armor hiding in the stables, prompting Tenedos to ask if he is okay. Gray reveals he made Irene upset, so she sent him away to review his actions. He then reveals how, according to him, a battlefield is a place where people achieve merit and glory. Irene, however, thought he was extremely selfish and was dragging a bunch of kids in his arrogant desires. She said war is full of bloodshed corpses, and the only reason people go to war is to protect their children, which is the exact opposite of what Gray is doing. Gray, oblivious as ever, continued to argue that those kids have great potential, and that he would protect them no matter what. Irene just about had enough of his bull and grabbed him by the collar, revealing that he will the bed as soon as he sees tens of thousands of men marching toward him. She says people will scatter in war, and since those kids have no way to protect themselves, they will end up dying. Now Gray is an undead, so he argues that death is not so bad, but Irene doesn't know this and kicks him out of the room. Gray does not know what he did wrong, so Tenedos knocks some sense into him. He says being alive is something that is very important to humans, as they have hopes and dreams that they want to achieve. Being alive means eating delicious foods, smelling flowers, feeling the wind on one's face, and whatnot. But all these beautiful things are taken away as soon as one becomes an undead. Gray finally gets that he was about to deprive these kids of the beautiful things attached to life, which made Irene upset. When he asks what he can do to understand humans better, Tenedos advises him to go to the tavern and use his magic to taste different kinds of foods. As he walks towards the tavern with a new understanding of life, he notices the same man he lent money to being mean to his wife. She's asking him not to gamble with the last of their family's money, but the man brushes it off and hopes to turn his life around with this money. As Gray steps up to help the woman, the man recognizes him and blames him for this situation. He says it's Gray's fault for giving him money because it made him gamble, which led to him being in debt and losing 2 of his fingers. He demands more money from Gray as consolation, and even though Gray agrees, the man's wife begs him not to give away any more money. Ignoring her pleas, Gray gives him the 2 silver coins he has left on him, but the man throws them away and asks him to give more as he is a nobleman. The old man then grabs Gray by the collar and blames him for his condition, making Gray realize that this situation is nothing like the one he read in the books. Meanwhile, a messenger reveals that the king's army has advanced out of the snowy mountains and has finally arrived at the Becker's doorstep. The day of the war is finally upon them, so Irene gives a brief on the situation. Baird is currently stationed across the river and has brought about 40,000 troops. In comparison, Irene's forces are only half in number. She worries that the king will have around 100,000 troops after Baird receives aid from the supporting nobles. The number between the 2 forces is quite large, which is why they must keep the king on the other side of the river. Gregory steps in and says numbers aren't the only thing that can win wars. Timing, location, and manpower are all the factors they must not overlook. He mentions that Baird has been marching for half a month, meaning his soldiers will be exhausted at this point. Also, it happens to be the rainy season in the Duchy of Becker, and if the king were to wait 2 more days, the river would be soaring in heavy rain, making it almost impossible to cross. His golden armored knights are not so familiar with the terrain, and the muddy riverbank will only make their lives tougher. Hearing from the expert gives Irene hope for her land. Meanwhile, Felder and his men have already taken high grounds on both sides of the river and are ready to crush Baird's forces on command. Irene suggests this is the best time to attack, so they can capture the king alive and win this battle. As she, Gregory, and Felder head to the battlefield, Abby reminds Irene that Gray is nowhere to be found. Irene is still upset with him and tells Abby to let him off, as he would join the battlefield if he is true to his word. Additionally, Abby tells him that Shelley has woken up from his coma and has asked him to keep this news private. According to Shelley, Jimmy is capable of doing black magic and is most likely not human. If what she says is true, this means this war is not just between humans. Meanwhile, despite the alarms going off, Gray is a sitting duck inside the tavern. Just then, the cat shows up and tells him what he did wrong with that drunkard. When Gray fails to understand, the cat gives him a live demonstration of a courtesan being bullied by her customers. Naturally, Gray would want to help her, but in this case, this would cause her to lose her job. On the other hand, a musician is being drenched by some junkies, but if Gray were to help the man, he would also lose his job. Sometimes, when you simply do what you think is right, without thinking of the consequences, the people you help end up resenting you. Gray understands what the cat is saying but is still confused about what he should do, as he doesn't really understand humans as he does. The cat says that no one really knows what to do in this world, and Gray is probably the only knight who takes his oath of valor seriously. Soon after, the soldiers hear the noise of a horse's hooves and wonder where it's coming from. They soon see Gray, the Silver Moon Knight, running into the battlefield with passion and aggression. The man asks the soldiers where his Discord kitten Lady Irene is, as he has something very important to report. One of the soldiers informs him that Lady Irene is on the highland next to the river valley. Gray doesn't waste a second and rushes straight to her location by jumping over the soldiers. After he leaves, the soldiers let out a sigh of relief as they almost got crushed but brush it off, soon assuming it might be an emergency. They'd also mention how this is the first time Gray is riding a horse other than Tenedos. Irene is looking over a ship loaded with soldiers from a cliffside and planning her next move. Just then, one of her men informs her that Gray has arrived and has something important to report to her. Irene assumes Gray is a fame-hungry who couldn't stay away from the battlefield and asks her men to bring him here. Accompanied by Abby and Horace, Irene meets Gray and asks what he has to report. However, Gray is strangely silent, hinting that he wants to speak with her privately. Irene does not have time for his and turns his back on him, stating that they can discuss whatever it is once they cross the river. Just then, Gray pulls out his sword and stabs Irene, thus holding her hostage. Soon after, he commands her men to burn all the ships, threatening to finish her off if they don't comply. Once the ships are burned, Irene and her forces have no way to cross the river and are forced to fight a defensive battle. Irene realizes her mistake and is fretting over how he didn't see through the bad Halloween costume this person was wearing. Turns out this person is not Grey at all. In fact, he is someone else disguised as Grey, mocking Irene for letting him in her army without even seeing his face. Soon after, Horus arrives with a squadron of knights and asks the man to set Lady Irene free, as they have already burned the ships like he asked them to. Since the king does not want Irene to die without facing the humiliation of defeat in war, this fake Grey lets her go. Horus commands the men to catch him, but he is too quick on his feet and gets away. He sends more men to follow his trail, and then turns his attention to a gravely injured Irene. While holding her, he promises that he will let no harm come to her. But Irene is a tough cookie and tells her to stop worrying about her. Instead, she wants Horus to find where the real Grey is. Speaking of Grey, the man just had a conversation with Tenedos about how human emotions work, but instead of getting clarity, he is now even more confused than he previously was. He asks the cat what humans usually do when they are asleep, only to learn that they hit the bed to solve all of their problems. However, Grey is a dark soul skeleton who cannot sleep either, so he now has to face his problems like adults. Just then, Grey is startled by a horde of knights running toward him. These knights assume he is the fake Grey who attacked Irene and try to arrest him. When Grey learns of this, he immediately calls a misunderstanding, claiming he was here the entire time. However, the men are furious and refuse to listen to his excuses. They put Grey in chains and give him a walk of shame like it's Game of Thrones throughout the entire town. But the man is so confused because he has no idea what really happened. Soon after, Grey is put in jail and realizes that someone impersonated him to attack Lady Irene. He wonders who had the balls to pull such a stunt and wants to leave as soon as possible so he can suck up to his dom mommy. However, Irene herself shows up with several guards and asks Grey to give him an explanation. Grey is head over heels to see Irene in good health and begins yapping that he is not the imposter but rather the crewmate. Irene sternly asks Grey if he has any proof of his identity, but the man is such a dumb asks her for a dance. The cat starts whining like about how this could expose Grey's identity, but this stupid stunt ends up assuring Irene that this is the real Grey. The man is delighted as Irene recognizes him just by his buffoon-like attitude, and the cat is confused about how that's even possible. Afterward, the prison doors are opened for Grey, who then asks Irene if they have found the person who impersonated him or not. He says he will arrest him and make him apologize, but Irene has had enough of this and tells the man to focus on other things. She says Shelley has awakened from her slumber, so she wants Grey to stay in the castle and guard her for a few days. She also wants Grey to keep an eye on Jimmy, who has been placed under house arrest, because she has a reason to believe he was responsible for that incident. Grey is worried about this request because there is a war going on and he could help her win, but Irene is rather strict and asks the man to stay out of it. In fact, she goes as far as to say that Grey would be doing her a favor by keeping his dumbass locked in the castle. Meanwhile, the guard who informed the fake Grey about Irene's location is blaming himself for the incident, but his friend is there to comfort him, stating that no one could have figured out he was the fake Grey. However, the news about the fake Grey has spread among people like a party gossip, and since Grey is always in his armor, no one can tell him apart from an imposter. Many people are afraid of Grey because of that reason, and this is why Lady Irene wants him to stay inside the castle. She promises to make it up to him after the war is over, but the man is such a thick-headed he doesn't want to look like a fool in front of his chivalry of kids by letting Irene go on the battlefield alone. Irene at this point is completely done with this idiot and yells out that a bunch of kids will not change the course of this war. She strictly asks Grey to and do as he is told, prompting Grey to finally grasp the situation if only a little. Afterward, Grey heads straight to Shelley to watch over her, and they too are watching the troops from the balcony. Shelley learned about the recent situation, which does not look good for their side as they have to passively defend. The king has 100,000 troops, as opposed to 20,000 on their side, which is a sure loss in Shelley's books. She then asks Grey what he exactly did for Irene to lock her best warrior inside the castle. Grey is all sad, claiming that Irene does not believe in him and his chivalry. He further claims that he has tried to help everyone he's ever met, but his actions have done more harm than good. He then mentions how he wants to take those kids to battle so they can toughen up, but they are not even allowed inside the barracks. Grey is really confused as to how humans work and cannot understand what it really means to be a knight. Shelley realizes a lot has happened in the time she is sleeping and tries to comfort Gray. She mentions how Gray helped her and her family, and that he is the kindest and bravest knight she has known. However, Gray does not understand the concept of distance and basically shoves his face into Shelley, turning the woman all red. He then constantly annoys her, stating he feels much better and that he wants her to answer more of his questions. However, Shelley says she is not an I-can-fix-him girl, so if Gray really wants to get a solution to his problems, he should visit the church. She states the pastor is a professional in solving problems and answering questions, so it would be of great help to Gray. Meanwhile, someone's trying to throw a grappling hook over the city walls, but it's more of a sad yo-yo attempt since the walls are way too tall. This someone is none other than the pastor who wants to leave the city. Just then, he is startled by Gray, who shows up right behind him. The man screams in horror, claiming he's not a spy and is just trying to leave before the war begins. However, the man calms down when he sees it's the Silver Moon Knight. He nervously asks what Gray is doing here, and Gray, with all the gravitas of a Shakespearean tragedy, reveals he's spiraled into a crippling depression and is here for some much-needed advice. Having no other choice, the pastor asks Gray to head to the church so he can answer his questions there. Meanwhile, one of Irene's men comes running in and reveals that the king's men have begun to cross the river. The men are crossing the river at a reef-strewn beach, which is 10 kilometers from their camp. Although many of the ships were grounded, some of them managed to slip through their surveillance. Now they are trying to bring knights and supplies to the shore using rafts. This naturally disturbs Irene because if the enemy forces have no way of going back, that means they are planning dinner in her castle tonight. Before she can grasp the situation, another one of her knights comes rushing in and reveals that Baird's forces have also been spotted in the northwest. The worst part is that the Felger family and Casper's men have both betrayed them and are gathering around the king's army. Irene is shocked as Fledger himself was under house arrest in the White City, and she had asked Gray to keep an eye on him and Jimmy. Since both of them cannot contact the troops, Irene is confused as to how they are sending orders to their men. Gregory shows up and asks Irene to pull back to the White City for now so they can defend it from within. However, Irene explains that their city is so isolated that retreating now would be like locking yourself in a room full of hungry cats with no exit and a whole lot of suffering. She asks Gregory to stay in position and intercept the Allied forces in the northwest. She, on the other hand, will head northeast to stop Baird's forces from landing. As she marches her men down, she claims they can win this war as long as they capture Baird. Meanwhile, the pastor asks Gray to state his troubles, and the man says this is about the chivalry he's formed. He had a lot of faith in these kids at first, but now he doesn't know what to believe in. He had sworn an oath to Lady Irene to protect her from any harm, but she ordered him to stay inside the castle when she needed him the most. His oath urges him to go out and help her, but he cannot defy her direct order and is confused as to what he should do. He's learned that the oath is not as literal as he thought, and he screwed up by strictly fulfilling it. The pastor sees right through Gray, realizing he's trying to be everyone's favorite flavor of ice cream. He then reveals that nothing in this world is universally accepted, not even the Holy Spirit. He says it's normal for Gray to be confused about his own identity, but the real Gray is what lies within the heart. While he explains to him about the complications of human nature, Irene and her men intercept Baird's forces in the northeast. The therapy sessions continue and Irene and her men faced heavy casualties against Baird's army. Things get so bad that Irene herself is gravely injured, but she refuses to back down even when Baird himself shows up. In the meantime, the pastor asks Gray to follow his heart's desire and stop worrying about pleasing others. He advises him to do what feels right and let the actions themselves decide what's right or wrong. While his words may sound mature, the pastor is just speaking out of his hoping that Gray would find his own meaning and leave soon so he can make his escape. However, before Gray can finally let the man go, he has one last question for him. The pastor plasters on a smile that's holding on by a thread, all while his insides are doing the cha-cha of fear, and invites Gray to state his question. Gray puts out a hypothetical situation, asking what if a man died and became an undead? Is such a person still allowed to dance around and do whatever he wants as he did before? He also asks the pastor to explain the difference between the living and the dead. The pastor says Gray is asking philosophical questions, now encounters Gray with a rhetorical question. He asks Gray what he thinks of a person who steals from others. Naturally, Gray thinks of a thief as a bad person. The pastor then asks what if that thief steals from the rich and gives everything to the poor, kinda like Robin Hood, and hearing this changes Gray's stance. The pastor then explains that just like this thief, the living and the dead should not be judged by what they are but rather by what their intention is. If an undead is good at heart, he is the same as humans regardless of his appearance. After understanding a little, Gray suddenly asks the pastor if he was trying to pull a Houdini and sneak out of the city. The pastor is taken aback by the question but realizes there is no point hiding it now. He reveals he received a letter from the archbishop which told him that the White City would be under attack by the morning and that he should leave as soon as possible. He doesn't want to leave the kids unattended, but he is following his heart by saving his own skin. Gray realizes from his words that Lady Irene will lose the battle by morning, which means he must protect her because of vowed to. As he's about to leave, the pastor begs him to take him along, and Gray thinks he wants to protect the lady too. However, the man says he just wants to leave the city walls so he can go his own way. Gray asks him to stay close and leaves the church, only to be met with the kids and his chivalry who are eavesdropping on them. Realizing Gray's heading to the battlefield to defend Lady Irene, they shout their intentions to join him like a band of hobbits ready to follow Frodo into Mordor. The pastor asks the kids to stop playing around as it's past their bedtime. Surprisingly, Gray agrees with the fatty and asks the kid to stay out of it because he cannot protect them on the battlefield. However, the kids are persistent and claim they already put their lives on the line the day they took the oath of knighthood before him. They claim they don't need Gray's protection, but rather want to support him on the battlefield. Gray is such a that he is moved to tears by their determination and asks them to prepare for war. As he takes them to arm up, the pastor asks Gray to rethink his decision as he's taking children to war. However, Gray claims they are no kids but rather knights of the Silver Moon Order. Just then, a squad of knights passes by and notices Gray and the kids. They immediately start shouting that they have found the traitor, swarming around him faster than paparazzi around a celebrity scandal. Gray asks them why they are calling him a traitor and wonders if there is another misunderstanding like the previous one. However, this time the knight swings his sword at him and tells him to go to hell. Gray gets upset and knocks the man out, furiously asking why they attacked him for no reason whatsoever. The guard accuses him of attacking the prison guards and freeing Felder and his son Jimmy. Turns out the imposter Gray was the one who did all of this, and Gray is now furious. Soon after, the caravan carrying Jimmy is informed about pursuers from the White City. He says there is only one guy following them, but the problem is that he is the real Silver Moon Knight. Jimmy already knows how powerful Gray really is and tells his men to stop him at all costs, or he will ruin everything they have built so far. Luckily, their caravan just arrived at the rendezvous, which means they now have reinforcements from their allies. As they stop to face Gray, he can't help but wonder why they aren't fleeing like extras in a Godzilla movie. Just then, Gray slowly approaches them and addresses the person who is impersonating him. He realizes this is the guy who tried to assassinate Irene and even executed the prison guards. When Gray sternly asks the man to reveal himself, he feels a strong aura coming from Gray. As he takes his helmet off, he recalls how Gray is famous for taking out 50 heavily armored knights single-handedly. Such strength is unparalleled in this world, but the man wonders if Gray can take on a force that is 4 times bigger than the one he faced earlier. As he reveals his face, he claims he abandoned his name and identity when he chose this role, but since Gray asked sincerely, he would answer his question. The man is the captain of the first unit, the King's direct shadow guard who goes by the title Shadow One. Mr. Cat realizes this imposter is no small fry and wonders what Gray would do against such a strong opponent. In truth, Gray wouldn't care if he was fighting God himself because his only strategy is to run through them. Mr. Cat is excited to see Gray from a complete idiot to an idiot with a plan. With his approval, Gray prepares for battle and asks Tenedos to launch a surprise attack. Seeing him come right towards them, Shadow asks his lancers to line up. In a matter of seconds, the whole squad creates a defensive formation perfect to stop approaching enemies. Such formations had tormented Tenedos a lot in the past, but they don't matter anymore as he tears right through them. A soldier, proving that common sense isn't so common, straps a leash on Gray, and in the next second, he's flying through the air like a really unlucky balloon. As Gray tears through the ranks, Shadow starts feeling more like a background extra in a disaster movie. When Tenedos spots him in the back, Gray charges right toward the poor guy. He thinks Gray is relying on his force and makes a miserable attempt to cut Tenedos' legs, only to receive a punch in the gut. The impact is so strong that not only does Shadow drop hard, but his internal organs suffer a lot of damage as well. As he drops with his spirit crushed on the floor, he realizes he's failed his mission and asks Gray to take his pathetic life. However, Gray says he has no intention of slaying people. All he wants is for Shadow to apologize to Lady Irene. Shadow thinks Gray is mocking him and says there is no point in saying sorries during the war. But Gray is persistent about his demand. Just then, Jimmy kicks open the door of his carriage, claiming he's had enough of everyone's. As he steps out of the carriage, he calls everyone a loser and declares death to everyone, including Felder. Just then, he casts a spell which causes everyone to choke to death. Mr. Cat is shocked to see a mystical black aura surrounding these men, and Gray reveals Jimmy has cast a black magic that directly robs life. Jimmy is amused to find that Gray is strong enough to resist both his magic eye and his dark magic, which means he can go all out on him. He then reveals how everyone thought it was Bjord who wanted to annex the Becker, when in fact he was behind it all along. Gray is hands down the strongest human he's ever encountered, but despite that, he's convinced humans are the cosmic equivalent of chewing gum stuck to his shoe, and he won't rest until they're scraped off. He declares himself a direct descendant of the legendary Dracula and vows to unleash hell on Gray and Lady Irene. Jimmy was a fan of Dracula ever since he was young and would read his stories in books that he would find fascinating. Even at that age, he would dream of having a fancy castle of his own from where he would rule the world. Their own vampire castle was dark and gloomy, based on a cliff with nothing to live in. Jimmy, on the other hand, wanted a shiny castle with lots of servants and planned on invading the human world to achieve his goal. His idea was to find a noble with white hair such as his own and pretend to be his illegitimate son so he could be an heir to the throne. Jimmy's goal is almost within his grasp, but standing in his way is Gray, the human equivalent of a traffic jam on the road to vampire paradise. As he sends a Kamehameha wave towards Gray, it causes a huge explosion that lights up the entire forest. Jimmy then menacingly laughs over a burnt-to-crisp Gray, realizing no one is left to foil his plans anymore. However, he says it's a pity he slayed everyone because no one is there to witness his greatness. Just then, Gray rises from the rubble, with his armor nearly shattered to pieces. He tries putting it on with magic, but the armor just falls into several pieces. Gray then appears in his Lich form, unscratched from the deadly attack Jimmy threw his way. The man then proceeds to turn every single dead soldier into a walking undead because he feels bad that no one was there to witness Jimmy's rampage. Seeing Gray as an undead sends Jimmy into a panic, his screams ringing out through the forest like a banshee on a roller coaster. Meanwhile, as the sun rises in the White City, Irene is gravely injured from his battle against the king and learns that pretty much all of his men are wiped out. There is only one remaining camp in their entire military, which has about 2,000 men left. If they were to retreat any further, they would have to take refuge inside the White City. Just then, Gregory shows up and asks Irene about her knight Gray. He is furious that Gray hasn't shown up at such a crucial time. But Irene explains she asked him to stay in the castle. Gregory urges her to bring Gray out, but Irene is broken at this point. She knows the king's army is nearly 100,000 strong, and there is no way a single knight changed the course of war. The final battle will be fought when the sun fully rises, and Irene has accepted the loss already. Seeing how Irene has given up, Gregory says he cannot let his men die without a cause, so he says he will surrender once the king takes over the city. Meanwhile, inside the city, the news about Irene's loss spreads chaos among the people. The people start questioning Gray, wondering where he has been at such a crucial time. Some people even contemplate leaving the city, and among the chaos is Shelley, who wants to leave the walls to reunite with his grandfather. However, the guards refuse to let her out as there is a war going on, and opening the gate might cause a riot. Shelley asks about Gray's whereabouts as he is tasked with staying by her side at all times. However, she is shocked to learn that the Silver Moon Knight has left the White City. The guards saw it with their own eyes that Gray left the city with a group of children, and no one dared to stop him. Since they have not received any battle reports of him going to the front, they are assuming he must have fled to save his own skin. However, Shelley is confident that Gray isn't someone who would run away from a battle. Meanwhile, Gray is carrying an unconscious Jimmy atop a cliff. Meanwhile, the war has caused so many deaths that the river has turned red due to the blood. Seeing all of this, the Archbishop says he does not approve of the fact that the king has changed the succession of the House of Becker. He says one bastard child is not worth killing thousands of men, and his word is quite important because the outcome of the war depends on his testimony. Baird wants the Archbishop to witness that the war is won fair and square so he can put a good word in for the Holy Order accordingly. The man is not convinced yet, so he will have to see it for himself before he makes a decision. On the other side, a gravely injured Irene watches the enemy forces slowly approach their border. The battlefield is covered with death at this point, and it is almost certain that Irene will fall at the hands of King Baird if she does not surrender in time. King Baird gives her one last chance to renounce her right to inherit the throne of House Becker. In exchange, he vows to pardon everyone on the opposite end. However, Irene knows King Baird is speaking out of his and won't hold any vow he makes. She recalls how the king had vowed to ensure the rights of the first heir of House Becker before, but he hasn't even stood by his own word. However, despite Irene's pleas, King Baird claims she is not the first heir, but rather little Jimmy, who is her brother. Seeing how the king won't stop until he's slain every one of them, Irene looks at her with hopelessness. Horus still has a lot of fight left in him, so he asks Irene to give them the orders. Irene is pleased to see that her men are willing to fight for her till their dying breath, but she can no longer watch them die without a cause. She asks Horus, Abby, and Gregory to take their men and get out of here. Despite being furious, the men have no choice but to follow their leader's final order. After they drop their weapons, Irene releases them of the pledge they'd made to her. She then recalls that there is one guy missing from here, but she's glad that Idiot is not here to witness her final moments. She knows Gray is super strong, and he would have no trouble finding a new lord for himself. With that, Irene picks up her sword and vows to fight till the end of her life. As she charges down the army all by herself, King Baird orders his men to take her down. Just then, they hear a voice in the background, calling out all the vows of a knight. Irene stops right in her tracks upon recognizing the voice and turns around to see his champion Gray finally arriving on the battlefield. As more knights join Gray's side, the enemy forces panic as they are well aware of the reputation he's built around these lands. Gray then raises his sword, claiming he's pledged his allegiance to Irene, and anyone who makes an enemy out of her makes an enemy out of him. With that, Gray and his squadron of knights charge into battle, aiming to wipe the floor with King Baird's army. Meanwhile, in the skies, Catherine seems quite happy watching this unfold. His teacher Abbott asks her why she's smiling, and the one reveals she finds it fascinating that when all humans have dissolved their allegiance, there is one undead lich who is willing to fight against an army of thousands. However, his drama has finally reached its climax, and Catherine wonders if this will be the end of the road for Gray. Before arriving at the battlefield, Gray had safely walked the pastor and the kids out of the city walls and had left all along to face the enemy, or so they thought. Soon after, the pastor hears horses galloping and notices a squadron of knights running his way. He looks at the crest and assumes it is of the enemy. He fears that they have been surrounded by the enemy and hides the children to protect them. However, one of the kids recognizes the crest on the armor and is sure that it must be Gray who came back for them. The pastor is shocked to see him find so many people, and Gray reveals he's brought horses and armor. He asks the kids if they are ready to go to war, and these little idiots are more than happy to. The pastor asks Gray to rethink his choice, but the man says he made an oath to take them to the battlefield, and a knight never breaks his oath. And this is how Gray ended up on the battlefield alongside a bunch of kids. Baird is sure a few knights cannot change the result of this war, and asks his knights of the golden armor to attack. Meanwhile, on the White City castle walls, the guards notice the Silver Moon Knight on the battlefield and realize he did not run away at all. On the other hand, Gray is charging towards Baird, asserting that no one will leave this place until they apologize to Lady Irene. As the king sends his men to attack, Catherine, who's been watching from the skies, asks his teacher Abbott if Gray can really win. Abbott says it's impossible, and although Gray is super strong, his magic will quickly run out while facing 100,000 men. However, Catherine finds it fascinating how, despite knowing the odds, Gray is still charging in without a care in the world. Even Mr. Cat is not scared. In fact, he is thrilled that Gray actually brought kids to a war. Gray says he received a revelation from the Holy Spirit, who does not want the undead to be a part of this war. However, Mr. Cat calls, claiming those undead were too unstable to fight an army of 100,000. Gray says he does not know if victory is possible, but he can make the king apologize to Lady Irene. When one of his knights almost falls off the horse due to the bumpy ride, he motives him by saying there is no such thing as bumpy rides and that he should believe in himself. Gray states they are all knights of the Silver Moon Order who have been blessed by the Holy Spirit. Just then, a surge of holy light emerges around the knights, and even Irene is shocked to see these events unfold. The knights are all filled with the Holy Spirit's power, and even the bishop is pissing his pants because only a true paladin can use the power, which is called the Divine Blessing. Meanwhile, Irene is super thrilled to see Gray go all out, knowing all too well he isn't invincible, but he still wants to kick some as they close in on the Knights of the Golden Armor. These poor souls realize that their ordinary weapons do not stand a chance against Gray and his men. Soon after, Gray tears through their outer ranks and starts making his way inside. Mr. Cat is terrified as he thinks they are all going to get burned due to the bright light, but Gray reveals it is not fire, but rather ascension caused by the revelation of the Holy Spirit. However, whatever Gray says, he knows he cannot use holy magic for long and will be burned to ashes if he keeps using it. King Baird sees his men fly left and right just by the sheer impact of Gray's power. Seeing this terrifies him to his very core, as he cannot believe a paladin is under Lady Irene's command. Meanwhile, the guards notice that the citizens have climbed up the city walls and are all cheering Gray on. Even Shelley is there to support him, claiming she always knew Gray would never run away from battle. The pastor is watching this from the forest, confirming that Gray is using holy magic and wonders if he is really a messenger of the Holy Spirit. Even Irene's own men, who were done and dusted, are all hyped up to see Gray tear through the enemy ranks. Catherine notices how everyone is cheering him on, not realizing he will turn into ash and dust if he keeps using it. However, she says heroes clothed in holy light appear in the world whenever evil takes over. Gray happens to be that hero in her eyes, which is why she wants to help him. Catherine flies down to the battlefield and asks Gray if he remembers her. Gray recognizes her from the church, and Catherine asks him to let her help him. She then places her hand on his chest and puts a holy mark on him, and it seems as if Gray himself has become an angel at that moment. The kids notice how their horses have stopped burning, and the light surrounding them is much more in control than before. Gray asks Catherine if the Holy Spirit acknowledges him, but Catherine tells the man to not push his luck, as he's only managed to impress an angel so far. As the whole battlefield shines bright in holy light, the Archbishop recognizes it as the guardian angel of the Paladin and gets off his horse. He says Gray came the miracle, which is the will of the Holy Spirit, which is enough to say that this war is unrighteous. Everyone seen from the castle walls starts calling it a miracle, and the king realizes his days of glory are as good as over. He furiously asks his men to not be scared of a paladin and attack him, claiming that they can still win with their large numbers. However, the Archbishop asks the to sit his down, as now he has reason to believe Baird is working alongside dark forces. The king is furious, claiming he is the one who brought him here and the Archbishop has no right to speak against him. As he takes a swing with his sword, Catherine asks Gray to intervene. Gray quickly jumps in and saves the Archbishop, who then goes on to tell everyone that Baird has been corrupted by evil forces. He calls upon the pious soldiers in the army and begs them to end this unjust war. Baird's own knights start eyeing him like he is the only meat-eater at a vegetarian party, and the man realizes his reign of terror is as good as over. King Baird of the Isaac Kingdom was well known for his bravery in his youth. He commanded a large army and defeated the invaders from the Kingdom of Alan at an absolute disadvantage. That battle made him famous in his kingdom, to the point that he became the whole of Isaac. Countless young men joined his army and became part of the Knights of Golden Order to follow in his footsteps. They would all look at him like a hero, but either you die a hero or live long enough to see yourself become the villain. The Archbishop keeps asking the men to drop their weapons, but some of them are still hesitant because they have taken an oath with the king. However, the Archbishop reminds them that the oath does not include the practice of injustice and asks them to look at everything that is right in front of them. After catching sight of the holy light, the paladins, and the guardian angel, the soldiers suddenly realize they're not in Kansas anymore and realize they just walked into the wrong end of a Lord of the Rings battle scene. On Irene's side, the pastor himself shows up claiming he will fight for the sake of the Holy Spirit as well. He reveals that those knights on the battlefield clothed in the holy light are all mere children who are 12 or 13 years of age. When the kids are suiting up to defend the motherland, the adults can't just chill like they're on vacation. The spectators at the city walls are shocked to learn that a bunch of teenagers are the ones who've turned the course of this war. One of them recognizes those kids as the ones who always follow the Silver Moon Knight like a mini fan club. The locals are so motivated by this story that they grab their own set of weapons and decide to put their lives on the line for the sake of the Holy Spirit. Soon after, the whole battlefield is engulfed in the chants of the Holy Spirit, and Baird's men start sweating, knowing all too well they've lost this battle. It begins with one soldier who drops his weapon and apologizes to the king, claiming he cannot fight for him anymore. He says he respects and honors the vows he took, but he cannot declare war on the Holy Spirit just for the sake of those vows. The soldiers start gossiping about how the vows don't include waging war on the Holy Spirit, and many of them start dropping their weapons on the floor. King Baird is furious as his own men have turned on him, stating how a few words from the enemy were enough to sway their loyalty. However, he no longer has any influence on his men, and even the golden armored knights have started dropping their weapons. One of the knights reveals he saw the king colluding with the Blood Vampire clan and regrets not reporting it to the Holy Order. King Baird puts on his best "who me" face, claiming he has absolutely no clue what the knight is talking about. But another one of his own men backs the claims, revealing he saw the king colluding with a vampire girl of silver hair. This makes it clear to Baird's men that he has been corrupted by the darkness, and that they have been engaging in an unjust war all this time. Realizing the king was about to lead them into a war with the Holy Spirit, their eyes fill with fury, and they close in on him like a mob of vengeful spirits who didn't get their morning coffee. The man continues to order them around about how he's the king and they are his pawns, but his reality has been exposed and no one feels any sense of loyalty toward him at this point. As the soldiers mow him down, Catherine and Gray watch him scream for help from the distance and realize that war is finally over. Gray is a clueless idiot who still has to ask if he won or not. Mr. Cat cuddles up to him and reveals he's won with a miracle, which not only makes him a hero of the White City, but also the greatest knight to ever exist in the whole world. Realizing his victory, Gray immediately turns back and walks back to his own side of the army. After approaching Lady Irene, the man gets off his horse and addresses Lady Irene. Gray drops on his knee and apologizes to the woman for showing up late and for failing to protect her properly. As he asks for her forgiveness, Irene starts trembling and crying, much to Gray's surprise. With a smile on her face, she says Gray did not come later. In fact, he came at the perfect time to lead them to victory. The whole army, or whatever's left of it, cheers for victory, and even the spectators rejoice in the name of the Holy Spirit. Shelley, who has been watching this from the castle wall, realizes that the drama of the resilient princess and the great knight has finally come to a perfect end. After the battle ended, Gray was celebrated as a hero who defeated an army of 100,000 all by himself. On the other hand, King Baird was dethroned, and a court sentence awaited him. Some of the other nobles who decided to support King Baird in the unjust war were put behind bars as they deserved, and with the full support of the Holy Order, Irene was declared the sole person deserving of her father's title. With that, she became the Grand Duchess of the Duchy of Becker. As for Gray, he was given a brand new title. Gray became the second Earl in the new Duchy of Becker, with the first one being Gregory. Just in a matter of few months, Gray went from a nobody to an Earl by his own merit, as if he was in a speedrunning contest. The story of his bravery spread throughout the continent, and every young knight treated him as a role model. In October of the same year, Archbishop Anthony went to the Holy Synod and reported the causes and consequences of the Battle of the White City. In November, Gray was finally crowned a Paladin by the Holy Synod. At that time, there were only 5 Paladins in the whole continent, including Gray. 4 of them were trained personally by the Pope, which left Gray as the only exception. Gray was enthroned, but when wasn't summoned, many people were left questioning as to why. On the other hand, a bitter struggle for the throne was taking place in the Lion capital, which had just lost its king. Turns out Baird was a grower, not a shower, and Homie had 12 kids who were fighting among themselves like Elden Ring's demigods. However, their battle had nothing to do with the White City, which was enjoying its newfound freedom. One beautiful day in the White City, the guards were boasting about how no one bats an eye on their city anymore. That's all thanks to Gray and Lady Irene, who fought a brutal war to get rid of everyone who wanted a piece of that ass. However, now it's time to change the title of the Grand Duke, and no one has seen Irene in days. Let's meet Viscount Horace, who hasn't slept in 5 days in order to count the war damage and appease the families of the deceased. Then there's Viscount Abbey, who has been up for a week dealing with a stagnant trade and diplomatic situation after the war. And as for Irene, she was responsible for the complicated governance of the territory after the war. She's been up for 9 days straight, and now she looks like she's auditioning for the lead role in a zombie apocalypse film. Horace is like, why don't we bring that Gray to join our suffering? But Irene knows that Idiot cannot solve 2 plus 2 on a calculator, let alone hand complex paperwork. She's relieved knowing Gray hasn't pulled a stunt in a few days, but she just had to jinx herself. A soldier comes running in like he's seen a ghost and reveals that Gray has done it again. This time, he literally sold the castle that was given to him to Gregory, and now he's dropping money from the castle tower like he's a Mr. Beast clone on YouTube. Irene's patience has officially expired, and she's gearing up to deal with this dumb finally. Good luck dealing with that Gray. Meanwhile, in the heavenly realms, Catherine and Abbott show up in full angel cosplay, looking so pure they could be mistaken for the real deal, as they seek an audience with the Holy Spirit. The Holy Spirit asks Catherine about her helping a lich, and the girl takes full responsibility, going as far as excluding Abbott from her decision. She says the situation was urgent, and if she hadn't stepped in, the lich would have eventually burned himself because of his faith in the Holy Spirit. A lich having faith in God is like a black guy joining the Ku Klux Klan, which is why they are amused. Catherine speaks quite highly of Gray, claiming he might be a dumbass, but he's loyal, brave, and honest. He's such a saint he would rather turn himself into ash and dust just to stand by what is right, which is a quality worth appreciating. This is why Catherine vowed to be his guardian angel. The Holy Spirit reminds her that a lich lives pretty much as long as the gods themselves, but Catherine has made up her mind and would support Gray for eternity if she has to. In December, the White City turned literally white thanks to all the snow. People who had been busting their all year could now relax and watch a certain rolling around in the snow. This none other than Gray, who had only read about snow in the books. This is the first time he's seen it with his own eyes, so his reaction is acceptable. However, Mr. Cat is not too happy about it, as Gray is now a paladin, and it doesn't suit him to roll around in the snow like a kid. However, Gray remembers Mr. Cat used to do the same so humans could serve him, and wants to try for himself. Obviously, the rules that apply to a cat do not apply to a paladin, and Mr. Cat is confident no one would care if Gray did what he does. However, a bunch of people show up offering Gray blankets, soup, and a thermos, much to Mr. Cat's annoyance. Mr. Cat starts throwing snowballs at him in anger, but Gray assumes he's challenging him to a snowball fight. Just then, he bumps into a lady and turns around to see that it's none other than Shelley. After she greets the man, Gray invites her to play in the snow, but Shelley declines, saying she'd rather avoid turning into a human popsicle. She says she has something personal that she wants to discuss with him, and asks if he would take a walk with her. Gray happily agrees, and as they stroll together, Shelley pulls the classic "I'm so cold" act just so Gray can give her a blanket. Shelley then gets to the business, claiming she heard Gray was awarded the fiefdom of Port Hamlet after Gregory bought his castle. Surely you would think Gray would remember such an important thing, right? Well, turns out his memory is worse than a bitter ex who forgets all the good things you've done for her. Mr. Cat has to step in and remind this idiot that it actually happened. He takes him back to the day when Gray was spilling coins from the tower to the general public after selling his castle. That day, Irene showed up all angry and asked if he really sold the castle she had given to him. Gray was like that one man who was scared of nobody except the 4-foot shoddy he sent for. She put on her best poker face and asked Gray if he had done it for money, but the man had no need for coins. He said he had done it so he could give money to his little knights and the people of that city who had been affected by the war. Mr. Cat was sure Gray was going to get a big scolding from Irene, but it has already been established that logic does not work for Gray. Irene started brainstorming and realized that she had only been compensating the families who had lost men in the war, but had completely forgotten about the fact that their city had lost a large number of laborers. This had caused many other families to go bankrupt, and Irene thought Gray was smart enough to think about that. Even though Mr. Cat knew that this idiot did not have the mental capacity to think that deeply, Irene had already made up her mind and didn't want her subordinates to sell their riches to remedy the situation. She promised to compensate Gray for his efforts and even reallocated a fief to him as a reward. Gray was so excited he came running in to hug Irene, only for her to crash headfirst into his metallic chest plate. Both Horace and Abby were worried sick, fearing she might have lost a few brain cells in the process, but fortunately, Irene was still operating at full capacity. No cognitive casualties were reported. She then asked Gray about his future plans and realized that man had no idea about the importance of his position. She explained that a paladin is entitled to a much bigger stage, so a small duchy was as suitable for him. Even the whole kingdom of Isaac is not enough for him to display his skills, which is why Irene said she could arrange for him to move to a better place if he wanted. However, Gray did not waste a second and refused the offer, which shocked Irene. He said he might not realize the importance of his powers, but what he does realize is that he is a knight of Irene. Led by his vows, he wanted to follow Irene to the end of his life and had no plans to leave anytime soon. Irene was moved to hear his words and gave the man a head pat. She apologized for not showing faith in him during the time of war, but now that she knew better, she was ready to accept him for who he was. She said it did not matter what he was or what he had done in the past. He would always be her knight, and she would do everything in her power to ensure that he was not wronged in any way. So that is how Gray became a fief of Port Hamlet. Shelley then asks if Gray has any plans to become an official member of the Becker family. But this man is such a dumbass, he assumes being an official member of the Becker family is some kind of a title granted to the knights. After the two stare at each other awkwardly, Mr. Cat realizes both of them pretty much share the same malfunctioning brain cell and asks Gray to reply carefully. However, he then thinks it's best if Gray just repeats after him. Mr. Cat says he will explain everything when they are alone and asks Gray to say that he has no intention of joining the Becker family, even though he will remain their knight forever. Shelley then figures Gray and Irene are not banging behind closed doors and asks if it's safe to assume that they have no secret relationship. Mr. Cat asks Gray to reply yes, and the guy does so. Shelley then bluntly asks Gray if she can be his companion, and Gray quickly replies yes, even before Mr. Cat could give him an answer. Shelley finds it quite funny how Gray is so direct with his answers, but who doesn't find it funny is Mr. Cat, because he knows Gray has walked into a situation he can't escape. After laughing her ass off, Shelley finally decides to disclose the deal to Gray. Turns out, before she came here, Grandpa Gregory invited her to his chambers to discuss the Gray situation. Since Gray was associated with the Holy Order and was officially crowned as a Paladin, the man started cooking some for him. However, Shelley had little interest in his politics and was eating donuts in the background. Instead of reading the room, Gregory kept yapping about how Gray does not have a last name, meaning he doesn't belong to any family. This meant Shelley could be a bait to lure Gray in to take their family name. In short, she has been ordered to go on a date with Gray by Gregory himself. Mr. Cat is left puzzled as to why Shelley would say all of this out loud. Regardless, she says it does not have to be anything special and a mere shopping trip would be enough for now. Gray has no idea what's going on, but he decides to tag along anyway to see where things go. Shelley then asks Gray about the job Irene gave to him, and the man reveals he was simply told to go around the streets and help anyone who needs it. Later, the two roam the streets and try out some dresses, eventually ending up at a restaurant for dessert. There, the manager serves them the Forest Volcano Berry Sundae, which is the signature of their restaurant. Shelley then notices Gray making weird expressions at the dessert and asks if he's okay. Turns out the man is drooling because the dessert looks way too delicious and wants to learn a magic spell that would help him eat stuff. Just then, a woman with her own personal guards shows up, and Shelley recognizes her immediately. This woman is Eliza, the first daughter of Duke Fernandez. Shelley knows Eliza is a troublemaker, but despite that, she puts on a smile and politely asks her when she arrives at the White City. Eliza reveals she came with Irene, took the throne, and then starts sticking her nose where it doesn't belong. She asks Shelley to stop behaving like a child or running around the streets like she has nothing better to do. Shelley nervously explains that she is not alone, but rather there is a knight accompanying her. Eliza then mentions how Shelley has now become an adult and advises her to be mindful of her actions and words at all times. After spewing all that, she takes her royal out of there, and Shelley is relieved to finally be off the hook. Gray is left wondering who this big shot girl was that left even Shelley nervous, and Shelley reveals she is her cousin. Turns out the Gregory and Fernandez families walk hand in hand because of their matrimonial relationship, and it is safe to assume that Shelley and Eliza basically grew up together. When they were kids, they would often play together, and Eliza was more Shelley-like at that time. Things shifted when she was forced into a dress so heavy. She wondered if she was secretly being prepped for a bodybuilding competition. Shelley was all amazed at how good she looked, but Eliza revealed it was thick and heavy, and that she didn't wear it by choice. She then ranted about how she has to act sophisticated in front of the nobles and talk a certain way because that's how it is for them. Shelley, still comfortably floating in his bubble of idiocy, suggested she just not do any of that, blissfully unaware that Eliza didn't exactly have a buffet of options. Eliza patiently explained to the that she couldn't be her old self anymore. She had to act like a discount princess on Disneyland to keep up appearances and prove her family raised her right, even though they didn't. The way they talked and the way they walked all mattered when it came to scoring a noble sugar daddy who might just treat them better than a Discord mod treats their kitten. From that point on, Elisa became the pick-me pushover that she is today, all in hopes of getting some noble schlong up her alley. And then there is Shelley, who wasn't treated as a middle child by his parents and ended up hating this royal lifestyle. She wouldn't act straight and marry a decent nobleman so her life could be on track. Rather, she would bone a skeleton in a silver armor. When she was busy talking about Elisa to one of her other personalities, a dumb knight with a cat on his shoulder appeared, and suddenly she wished for an extra bone in her body. After all that revelation, Shelley and Gray finally arrive at the Gregory residence, and the man asks if he can walk her in. Shelley asks him to shoo away as it's already past her bedtime, and she doesn't want to be seen screwing a skeleton. You don't have to tell Gray twice, so the man packs up and walks off, leaving Shelley wooed over his kindness. She comments how nothing is normal in Gray's life and wonders if she could use him to solve her own problems. However, Gray is too nice of a person, and she doesn't want to take advantage of him in such a way. The next day, Irene wakes up to find a royal update from Prince Benedict, one of Baird's sons, who's finally won the Game of Thrones title. Guess he's been binge-watching all the right episodes, so Benedict wants Irene, Gregory, and Paladin Gray to participate in his enthronement ceremony. Gregory is confused as to why he was invited alongside Irene and Gray, and Shelley reminds this living, breathing dementia that he actually supported Irene in the war. Shelley is only betting 5 million donuts that Benedict will try to make a ploy on Gregory's relationship with Irene. The man can't turn it down because Irene wants him to go and asks him to keep his guard up, even if it's a banquet, because she has also watched the Rains of Castamere. As the night falls, the noise of someone approaching is heard in the mountains, and Dora quickly stands guard to protect a cowering Jimmy. However, it turns out to be Gray in his Dark Souls undead costume, who has brought a bag of God knows what. Jimmy has already given up on life and wonders why he's here. Dora, on the other hand, has yet to explore all corners of Jimmy's vampire butt, so she's all in to protect him. However, Gray tells them to take a chill pill because he's not here to expose them to sunlight. In fact, he's here on his part-time job as an Amazon delivery guy who's just delivered a set of armor for Jimmy to wear. Jimmy starts getting PTSD from the last time he cosplayed as Gray's son and wonders what torture he would go through this time. Gray explains that since Jimmy sucked the soul out of every human during the war, he was in clear violation of the treaty. Catherine had every right to obliterate him, but Gray used his paladin privileges to let him live. However, Jimmy can survive only under the condition that he becomes Gray's lapdog until he's fixed his attitude. Jimmy is contemplating if dying would be a better option, but Gray is optimistic that since he became a paladin, so can vampires. He's now instated Jimmy and Dora to his knightly order and wants them to accompany him into the Lion capital. In January of 10,754, Duchess Irene set out on a journey to the Lion capital alongside her trusty paladin Gray. However, their journey faces some difficulty thanks to the thick, foggy winter. Since it is too dangerous to travel blindly, Abby suggests taking refuge in a nearby village, and Irene agrees to rest for now. On the other hand, Mr. Cat notices how Gray has been acting like a sussy bake-up, as if his mind is distracted by something or someone. He mentions how he's feeling something strange about the fog, but Mr. Cat brushes it off, claiming it's because Gray has never seen fog before. Just then, the floor breaks beneath Gray's feet, and he, alongside Tenedos and Mr. Cat, falls into a crevasse. Gray wonders how they fell down and checks up on Tenedos, wondering why he didn't say anything before. Just then, Gray hears Lady Irene's voice calling to him and shouts out to let her know of his location. Just then, Irene shows up covered in a sinister aura and commenting on how it's super difficult to find Gray alone. From the first look, Gray can tell something is off and even notices how Irene is wearing a different armor compared to the last time he saw her. Strangely, Irene pulls out her sword slowly and then slashes it toward Gray in a quick swing. Gray starts sweating, wondering what's going on here, and asks Irene why she's gone crazy. Irene menacingly explains to Gray that since she has everything she needs, there is no need for Gray by her side anymore. She takes another swing at Gray, who jumps over it, wondering why she's doing all of this. Mr. Cat yells out that Irene is trying to send him back to the underworld, and that Gray must defend himself. While they're fighting, Mr. Cat comments on how the war is over, and no one needs him anymore. He also mentions how since Gray is a paladin, people give him more attention than Lady Irene, which is why she might have developed a grudge against him. Just then, two men from her army stab Gray in the back, and even though the man is in excruciating pain, he continues to defend Irene's character, knowing all too well she will never pull something like this against him. However, Mr. Cat keeps insisting that Gray needs to fight back or he will lose everything he's worked for. Despite that, Gray recalls the vow he's made to protect Lady Irene and chooses not to hurt her. Irene laughs in his face, stating those vows don't mean jack. She then swings her sword 100 times and tears apart Gray's armor, to the point that even his helmet falls off. Mr. Cat is horrified to see that Gray's hopes and dreams are over. On the other hand, Irene is a little shocked to see that Gray is actually an undead under that armor. She then bursts into laughter, finding it quite ironic how an undead received the power of the Holy Spirit and made his way to becoming a paladin. However, she now has even more reason to make Gray disappear. She orders her men to attack Gray, who breaks his armor apart using their spears. Irene then swings her sword and literally breaks Gray's right arm off. While the man sits on his horrified at Irene's actions, the woman realizes Gray is actually way more fragile than she initially thought. Mr. Cat gives Gray one last warning to fight back, but Gray has already made up his mind and won't lay a finger on her. Gray asks Lady Irene if she's serious about taking his life, and Irene fires back with a taunt, asking if he's wet himself yet or if that's still a work in progress. Taking the hint, Gray opens up his jacket to reveal his insides, much to Mr. Cat's and Lady Irene's shock. Gray then points toward his soul fire and asks Irene to aim for the heart so she can finish him off in a single blow. Irene is actually offended because she thinks Gray is testing her. She charges him down with her sword, ready to show him that she will actually take his life. However, midway in her attack, Lady Irene hesitates and Gray finally realizes what's up. He recalls how it's against the agreement of the Gray Robes to do something to him without permission, which is why they can't hurt him. The man then charges up with soul fire, which grows back his severed arm, and begins cleansing the illusion. He says he does not care who this person posing as Irene is, but he will not tolerate him insulting his lord. Gray then warns him never to interfere with his consciousness, and with that, the illusion is broken. Just then, Gray feels a tap on his shoulder and screams like a kid, scaring both himself and the real Lady Irene. She mentions how Gray had been standing still in one spot for minutes, and didn't even respond when she called her name. This is why she came to check up on him. Gray brushes her concerns off and asks her if the fog has lifted or not. Ern says there was no fog to begin with, and the weather has been as clear as it can be. She asks if Gray fell asleep on the horse and had a dream, and Gray pretends to go along with her story. Noticing how he looks exhausted, Irene reminds him that they are heading to a nearby village where he can rest for the night. Despite acting all fine, Gray cannot understand what the hell just happened to him. Meanwhile, on a nearby cliff, two demons named Zelda and Tarbia are watching the caravan head towards Lion Capital, and Zelda is making fun of Tarbia for getting burned because of Gray's soul fire. Zelda then comments on how persistent Gray really is, and Tarbia cannot understand how they found such a simple lich. Zelda asks if they should expose Gray's identity to make him lose his privileges, but Tarbia is cooking something even more sinister. She mentions how the Demon Lord wants to mess with the guys in the sky, so making a paladin fall and revealing his identity as a lich would really shake things up here. Just then, they notice how Gray's guardian angel Catherine is back, and Tarbia comments that they will have to leave for now. Zelda is confident he can destroy a second-grade angel like her with one hand, but that would also break the treaty between the Heavy and the Abyss, so they decide to play passive for now. Meanwhile, as Gray is resting in a village house, Catherine shows up at his window and says she has both good news and bad news. Gray excitedly says he wants to hear the good news first, and Catherine says the Holy Spirit approves of her being his guardian angel. From this day onwards, Gray is officially recognized as a paladin by the Holy Spirit. Even though the man is ecstatic to hear this, the bad part of the news is that he cannot expose his identity. The moment anyone finds out that he is a paladin, his association with the Holy Spirit will be over. They will not only deny colluding with him, but also launch a crusade to end his shenanigans. If Gray can reveal his identity to other people without them becoming hostile toward him, these conditions will not apply in that case. Catherine is disappointed in herself, claiming this is as far as she can go for him given her current rank. However, Gray is super excited that as long as his identity is not exposed, he can manage everything else. He thanks Catherine for going so far for him, and she realizes that Gray is actually a simple and dumb child. Just then, she notices something quite off about Gray's aura. She then realizes that Gray has the scent of a demon on his body and asks where he got it from. Later, as Irene and her squad show up in the Lion capital, they are greeted with a warm welcome, and people are super thrilled to see a paladin in the flesh. Youngsters look up to Gray as a role model, while the more political adults see this as an advantage over other kingdoms. Amid all of this warm welcome, all Gray can think about is his encounter with the demons. He had already expected it to happen someday, but he never knew it would happen so soon. It takes him back to his conversation with Catherine, when she mentioned that Gray smells like demons. Gray explained the whole fog thing and how a demon impersonated Lady Irene to attack him in his consciousness. While Catherine is worried that he is already on the radar, Gray is clueless about his situation because he drove the demon away. She reminds Gray that there is a pact between angels, demons, and liches, which is called the Gray Robes Agreement. According to that pact, demons cannot use direct force against him, which is why they messed with his head to distort his faith. Many paladins have been corrupted by these pesky demons using the same tactic, but Gray is not just any paladin. He is confident that these cheap tricks will not work on him, and even Catherine is well aware that Gray will not be corrupted by these demons. However, she warns him, explaining that his next opponent might be a human. Since Gray is already aware of the demon's existence, they will not approach him directly anymore. Instead, they will target him by pretending to be human. She mentions that there are a lot of self-sacrificing demon envoys in this world, and Gray wonders how he can tell between an actual human and an envoy. Even Catherine isn't sure because envoys have no magic powers, unlike demons. This is why she wants Gray to be extra careful with anyone who approaches him with malicious intent. Amid recalling this conversation, Gray and the rest finally arrive and meet up with the new King Benedict. As Irene and Gray bow to the man, he reveals he is not the king, yet as the bishop still holds the title. He further says he will be crowned in a few days, which is why he invited Paladin Gray, so he could witness it with his own eyes. He asks Gray not to bow to him with his status, but Lady Irene reveals Gray is actually an Earl of the Duchy of Becker, which means he is the king's subject and is inclined to bow to him. Benedict comments that an earldom is a low title for a paladin, meaning the man has his eyes set on making Gray his royal guard or something. Irene finds it rather surprising how Benedict is being so straightforward even during his ceremonial gathering, but despite that, she still has to suck up to him. Benedict notices how clever Irene really is just by her reply. The man then turns around and asks them to rise. Later, the squad is welcomed to the ball inside the king's palace, and Gray is shocked to see how fancy the place looks. Inside, Gray asks Mr. Cat why the king mentioned the earldom, and learns that the king actually thinks Irene is not fit to be Gray's lord. Gray is confused because he has always thought of Irene as a great lord and wonders if Benedict hates her because she led a war against her father. It then clicks in his head, which is obviously not a good sign given his lack of common sense. Gray claims Benedict is actually a demon envoy, which is why he is targeting Lady Irene. He charges up his fist to beat the man up, but luckily he is stopped by his guardian angel. She explains to this stupid idiot that although every envoy is a bad guy, not all bad guys are envoys. She also realizes that Gray is practically a and that she will have to babysit his from starting another war. She also realizes that despite living in humans for quite some time, Gray has no idea about how society works and how they have been divided into classes. She explains how Gray is now a paladin and his actions now represent the Holy Spirit. On the contrary, Benedict is the ruler of Isaac, and his actions represent his country. If Gray were to take action against the king, people would assume he's done so by the order of the Holy Spirit. On the off chance that Benedict is proven innocent, everyone will think the Holy Spirit waged war on an innocent nation, which is worse than it sounds. Gray realizes the gravity of his actions and refrains from attacking the man. Catherine tells him that even if Benedict was a demon envoy, Gray would still not be allowed to interfere directly. She explains the whole masking thing and makes him understand that both he and Benedict are wearing a mask if he's a demon envoy. The only way to stop him is to take his mask off and let the world know of his identity. Gray thanks Catherine for making him understand the delicacy of this matter and vows to rip the mask off of Benedict's face. Obviously, Gray just slept through everything she just said. At night, as Gray enters the ball with Irene, everyone starts talking about the Paladin and the first female Grand Duchess in their kingdom. People even start gossiping that Gray's getting the royal night shift with Irene because a paladin downgrading to a duchy without some royal pillow talk just doesn't add up. Irene notices the slander among the nobles and realizes that such rumors are spread deliberately, unlike her legs, to throw shade on her character. Just then, Benedict shows up and warmly welcomes the delegation of the Duchy of Becker. As he starts the ball, he invites Irene to dance with him, and once again, she has to suck up to him even though his breath smells like Gray, of course, does not understand why he has to be in this situation, and Mr. Cat tells the guy to man up and find someone else. Claiming he's been to a prom before, Gray starts looking around for a potential dance partner until he sets his eyes on his last hope, Shelley. The man walks up to her and hopes to ask her for a dance, but he's a little more popular among the ladies than he initially thought. As dozens of girls surround Gray in hopes of getting a dance with him, it soon turns into a civil war, with every one of them fighting the other over Gray. While Gray is terrified of these not-so-noble ladies, Mr. Cat is shocked to see how popular Gray has become. Soon after, the ladies start grabbing onto Gray, pulling and pushing him for a dance. The man gets so fed up that he has to yell out that he only wants to dance with Lady Shelley. While Shelley is stopped in her tracks, the crowd starts murmuring who this Shelley is, and one of the girls mentions Shelley is a daughter of the Gregory family. They all start looking at her with envious eyes, wondering what's so special about this girl that Gray is choosing her over everyone else. Gray is obviously clueless and starts jumping around asking Shelley to dance with him. Shelley is fuming red as this has put her on everyone's radar and asks Gray if he has a feud with her. Gray does not take the hint and further insists that he wants to dance with her. Despite being furious, she has no choice but to dance with Gray, but instead of letting Gray lead, she is the one to lead all the poses. Even when it's obvious that Shelley isn't happy about this, Gray fails to read the room and keeps complimenting her dancing skills. Even King Benedict finds it rather interesting how Gray likes to reverse the roles during the dance, and Irene is embarrassed and covers it up by saying that Gray likes to do experiments. Benedict then asks Irene about Gray's armor, asking if anyone has ever seen his real face. Irene reveals she hasn't seen it, but Benedict laughs out, claiming girls will go crazy over him no matter what he looks like. He then asks Irene if she feels the same way, but Irene has to be on her best attitude so she doesn't start another war. Benedict then asks her for a private chat and takes him inside the castle. The man then asks Irene to make a deal with him in exchange for handing Gray over. He knows Gray has a strong allegiance to Lady Irene and won't leave her side easily. This is why he wants her to break her vows with him and make Gray pledge his allegiance to Benedict. However, Irene says this is not something she can decide unilaterally. However, Benedict asks her not to refuse to quickly and at least hear him out. He offers her a large piece of land and a prosperous territory on top of what Irene already has in exchange for Gray. This way, Irene will not only rule her current land but also become lord of another, a feat not even his father couldn't accomplish. Irene continues to insist that this is something cannot decide on her own, but Benedict drops the formality robe and asks her not to be a stubborn little girl. He comments on how Irene wants to possess Gray all for himself, but Irene really has no idea what he is talking about. He mentions how a mere knight on a horse, helped by an angel and cloaked in the holy light, faced an army of 100,000 men just to rescue a girl, which sounds quite romantic in his eyes. Irene is doing her best not to punch him in the face because the man is implying that Irene is breaking beds with Gray behind closed doors. Despite that, Irene is claiming she has no such intentions, which Benedict finds hard to believe. He comments on how Irene can't marry Gray because she is the sole heir of the Becker family. On the other hand, Gray can marry Irene because he is a paladin recognized by the Holy Synod. He says if their affair becomes public, both of their reputations will be tarnished, which will be fatal for the stability of Becker. This is why they can only be master and servant. Benedict further says how the royal prestige has hit rock bottom after the Battle of the White City, and his troops no longer follow his orders. The neighboring kingdom of Alan has begun to make its move on Isaac, which is why Benedict wants Gray on his side. However, Irene brushes it off and promises to support him in the battle against Kingdom Alan. The man is rightfully frustrated because a mere promise means nothing. He mentions how his own father promised to protect the rightful inheritance of Becker, but went back on his word when the time came. What he needs is not a promise, but a strong paladin who can wipe the floor with their enemies. He then pitches the idea that once Gray becomes the hero of this country, he can come back home and propose to the girl he loves. In that case, even the people will support this relationship, and it will be a happy end to this love story. While he continues to shove this romance down her throat, Irene has to be on her best attitude despite wanting to punch him in the face. Meanwhile, at the ball, as Shelley finishes her dance routine, she realizes that the ladies are still eyeing her like she owes them money. He comments on how these will be acting all cute and innocent if the king was here, and also realizes this would have been Irene's fate had she danced with Gray instead. Shelley is practically doing her a favor by taking the heat and will definitely cash it in at a later date. Gray then asks why she looks so worried, but Shelley brushes his concerns off and asks him why he chose her today. She assumes Irene put him up to it, but Gray says he only ever danced with her before, and since she is the one who taught her how to dance, it would be most suitable for him to pick her. Also, he didn't want to make a fool out of himself by stepping on someone else's toes. Shelley asks Gray not to worry about embarrassing himself, mainly because he is a living, breathing embarrassment to begin with. Back in the castle, Benedict mentions how Gregory is an old fox who annexed 7 families without bloodshed. The only reason he supported Irene in the war is because he saw Gray's connections to the church and wanted to cash in on it. As long as he is alive, it will be hard for Irene to control the real power of the Duchy of Becker. This is why he was invited here alongside Irene, so he does not go around doing shady behind her back. Benedict offers that he can help take care of Gregory, but Irene once again cannot do anything that ruins her reputation. Meanwhile, Shelley urges Gray not to dance with anyone except Irene, explaining that the king wants to take him away from her. Gray asks about the king's motivations, and Shelley explains the imbalance in power between the royal family and the prestige of the clergy rose. In order to stabilize his power, the king needs to do something impressive, and nothing is more impressive than having a paladin in his army. Additionally, the religious parties have had a taste of power after the Battle of the White City, and because of that, they will ask Gray to leave Irene and join the king's side. Since the Pope is also in favor of this, Shelley asks Gray what he will do in this situation. Gray is left puzzled and asks his guardian angel if this is what the Holy Spirit wants. Catherine reveals the Holy Spirit never gives specific orders and lets the believers decide for themselves. This means that the Pope is doing what he thinks is right, and Gray should do what he thinks is right. However, Gray has more serious matters at hand, like demons who tried to corrupt him. Speaking of the demons, Zelda and Tarvia are joined by some petite powerhouse, who is a little surprised because it's super rare for Zelda to ask for her help. Watching over Catherine from a distance, she fails to understand how a mere second-class angel managed to deter Zelda and Tarvia. They tell her not to face Catherine head-on because she is way more powerful than she seems, but the demon girl tells them not to worry. As she marches in to face her head-on, she comments that Catherine does not have the power to stop her. Just then, Catherine notices a strong aura that is strong enough to startle even her. Meanwhile, in the mansion, Gregory knocks on Irene's door, claiming he has some urgent matter to discuss. Irene opens the door looking like she's an average Lana Del Rey fangirl, and Gregory is shocked to see she still hasn't changed from last night's dress. He realizes Irene hasn't slept all night, but she brushes his worries off and invites him inside. As he gets seated, Gregory explains that some unusual movement of troops was recorded in the Allen Kingdom 4 days ago. The king ordered the Duke Downers to send troops to the border, but they all refused. Catherine's face shows obvious concern as she asks Gregory to continue. Gregory then reveals this incident actually happened 15 days ago, but for some reason the news was blocked and did not come to light until 4 days ago. He further adds that the royal family's prestige is down in the gutters, and the king needs more support than ever. This is why the king's been kissing so much church out, all in the name of keeping the Holy Synods' favor. But those guys have no interest in meddling with the country's personal affairs. The man is desperate to have some leverage, so Gregory is worried he will try to go after Irene or even Gray. Irene is impressed at Gregory's analysis and reveals Benedict approached her last night for the exact same reason. Gregory is baffled upon hearing the news and asks Irene about Gray's whereabouts. Looking concerned, Irene reveals Gray was summoned by the Archbishop for church service. The church has been colluding with the king for a very long time, so Gregory asks her if she is really comfortable knowing her ace card is playing in the king's lap. However, Irene confidently tells him not to worry, revealing Gray is not alone. Meanwhile, Gray and Shelley finally reach Pierce Cathedral, and like the idiot he is, Gray can't shut up about how this church is basically the deluxe version of their hometown dump. Having no clue why Shelley is beside him, he asks her if she was invited to the church as well, making her realize enduring another 4 years of Donald Trump would have been easier than handling this idiot. Last night, when Shelley was sleeping soundly, Irene sneaked into her room and woke her up. She asked her to accompany Gray to the church tomorrow, so here she is, regretting every single choice in her life that has led her to babysit this idiot. Just then, they hear a familiar voice calling out Gray from the church. The voice comes from Dean, who happily greets him and asks Gray if he still remembers him. Gray is delighted to see him here, claiming Dean is the one who enlightened him and taught him the truth about the heart. Shelley doesn't seem too impressed with his enlightenment, and Dean nervously explains that it was merely a nice talk with Gray. He then reveals that the Archbishop is waiting for them inside and invites them in. Heading inside, they find Anthony beside 2 disciples who give them a warm welcome. After Gray greets them all, Anthony assumes Shelley is the Grand Duchess Becker, since he had asked for Catherine to accompany Gray. Shelley then introduces herself and reveals Catherine was not feeling well, which is why she came along instead. Anthony's disciples are immediately wary of her presence, but the man asks them to back off. Since Shelley is the spokesperson on behalf of Catherine, it would be rude to treat her like an outsider, though with her personality, it's hard to treat her nicely. Back in the mansion, Gregory is so upset about Catherine using Shelley as a shield that he forgets how to hold a teacup. Catherine explains that the king and the church both want to use the emotional card to persuade her, but she has to make it clear that she is not going to interfere, and it is entirely Gray's choice whether he stays with her or serves the church. She reminds him Shelley is a clever and perceptive girl, and having her will be really helpful for Gray to deal with those old foxes. However, Gregory is still furious, stating that despite her perceptiveness, Shelley is still a young girl and Catherine has pushed her into fight her. Catherine then reveals she is aware of Gregory's intentions to marry Shelley with Gray so he can be a part of their family. For that to happen, he must be prepared to take such risks to make sure Gray does not fall into the church's hands. Realizing the high-risk, high-reward situation, Gregory finally calms down and takes a deep breath. He then asks Catherine if she can really let go because everyone can see how close Gray is to her. She says it does not matter if she lets go or not, explaining that if she were to send Gray to the king due to her personal feelings, that would be a betrayal of Gray and the oath they made. Meanwhile, the others are giving a church tour, and Gray is losing his mind because the church looks even bigger and more beautiful from the inside. Anthony notices how excited Gray is and tells him that he'll arrange for someone to give him a full tour afterward. Shelley explains how the cathedral is not just a place of worship and prayer. In fact, it is in charge of the entire district, and many clergymen are stationed here. This is why the building standard is much higher when compared to other places. After Anthony confirms everything she's just said, he shows them a giant fresco, and Shelley seems to be familiar with it. She explains that it is about a man named Abbatsold, who was executed by a mob thousands of years ago, adding that she never expected it to be displayed in a church. Gray is terrified to hear the story because he knows he will suffer the same fate if his identity is exposed. Anthony explains that Abbatsold was a devout saint who advocated radical religious reformations that offended both the nobles and commoners of that day. Due to the masses hating him, the Holy Synod had no choice but to give up protecting him. He was so universally hated that even mentioning his name was equivalent to saying the N-word today. The man was eventually executed, and it took the church centuries to resolve the matter and clear up his name. The Pope of that age commissioned this painting and displayed it in the church so it serves as a warning to future generations. Shelley mentions how ironic it is for the Holy Spirit to give up protecting a devout man. Anthony gives her a disappointed look and explains that the Holy Spirit actually prefers the masses over devotes, prompting Shelley to make sarcastic comments. Anthony is blown away by the size of this woman's metaphorical balls, knowing full well that with her here, today's chat is going to be a dumpster fire in slow motion. Meanwhile, in the Lion capital, 2 locals are discussing yesterday's ceremony when they notice something fly by at super high speed. However, they are too old to care for anything other than their tea, so they shrug it off. This high-speed thing is actually Catherine, who is looking all over for that petted demon. Her nerves are shot as she yells at the demon girl to come out, only to be clowned on by a voice reminding her just how useless she is at sensing auras. Catherine fires back, assuming the demon girl has hidden her aura, but she reveals she never did such a thing and is close by even now, meaning Catherine is just not looking hard enough. Despite being a powerful holy angel, Catherine starts sweating because even she knows she is no match for this being. The demon girl then offers to come out as long as Catherine admits she failed at locating her, and having no other choice, Catherine admits defeat. The demon girl appears literally in front of her and pokes her nose, hinting at the difference in their power levels. She introduces herself as Vivian the Phantom, and Catherine is so terrified she quickly backs off, tripping off the roof before falling into a pile of boxes. As she gets herself together, Vivian continues to mock her from the top. Catherine asks if she is the same demon who attacked Gray, but Vivian, in her own sadistic way, explains that she was only just assigned to this duty. Catherine does not understand what she means by duty, so Vivian explains that the two of them will be colleagues from now on. She asks what her intentions are, and Vivian reveals she is here to become the Guardian Demon of Gray. She explains she invented this term to mock the concept of a guardian angel, but Catherine's holy ass gets offended and tries to fight her. However, Vivian asks her to rethink her next move, because not only is she outmatched, but she will also be breaking the truce between their races by initiating combat. In the cathedral, Anthony recites a verse from the Holy Book that says the Holy Spirit favors the world. This is why it sends its most trusted angels to earth to assist the most devout believers and make them clergy. Due to the foolish taste of the world, these holy ones have to condescend to themselves and accommodate the world. Anthony continues to explain how it is the duty of the holy ones to do whatever they can to convey the message of the Holy Spirit to as many people as possible. However, Gray and Mr. Cat would rather watch the paint dry than listen to this man. Just then, Shelley interrupts the old man and asks why the Holy Spirit chooses saints when the people are freaking idiots. She says it would be much more effective for the Holy Spirit to show itself and turn people toward the right path. But Anthony defends his point by saying they cannot force people to accept the favor of the Holy Spirit. As the atmosphere becomes more tense, Gray sits there, silently praying for the debate to end so he can get back to the streets and resume his full-time job of being an absolute idiot. Mr. Cat asks him to stay, as even though Shelley is one of them, they cannot afford to offend the Archbishop. Soon after, Shelley and Anthony start arguing over the duties of a true paladin, with one claiming a paladin should serve the church, while the other claiming a paladin should follow their oath and serve the people. They turn toward Gray, hoping he'd share 2 cents on the topic. Little do they know, Gray's bank balance is somehow lower than his IQ. He turns to his feline companion for advice, but Mr. Cat suggests he calls out Catherine and let her feed him the answers. However, Gray reveals he has been cut off from her since last night. Catherine is busy dealing with Vivian, so Mr. Cat urges Gray to stall or he will somehow end up offending both sides. In a stroke of accidental genius, Gray apologizes and says he needs to go back and think about this question, which leaves both Shelley and Anthony shocked. Anthony rhetorically questions if Gray wants to support them in their great cause of spreading the faith, but Gray firmly stands his ground and says he needs to think about it. While Shelley is holding back her laughter, another looks like he saw his grandmother do backflips and asks Gray why he feels the need to think about such an obvious question. Gray cleverly replies that he is the representative of the Holy Spirit, and every word or action he does represents them. This is why he needs to be very careful about what he says, because he carries that great burden on his shoulders. Gray's response is so mature it sends Anthony back to the Ice Age, while Shelley is having the time of his life seeing Gray make a fool out of the church. While face-palming in disappointment, Anthony asks Gray to head back and think carefully about his answer, stating he will eagerly wait for a reply from the Paladin. As they leave the church, Shelley takes a good stretch as she is finally free and comments on how Gray shocked everyone with his words. Gray asks her why she was arguing with the Archbishop, and Shelley reveals it's because Anthony and the King have colluded to steal him away from Irene. Since she is the spokesperson for her, she has to make sure that does not happen. As Gray finally understands the seriousness of this situation, Shelley pulls a full 360 and starts tickling him because she had to wake up early morning to babysit him. She jokingly asks Gray to compensate her for her help, and Gray agrees to treat her to a dessert, followed by a shopping trip. She is shocked to see Gray actually has some wrist despite being a complete idiot, but Gray just remembers she likes doing those things from their previous dates. Meanwhile, Anthony is watching them act like complete buffoons from the window and asks Dean what is the relationship between Gray and Shelley. Dean doesn't know much, claiming Gray and Shelley have always been close, leading Anthony to believe they might have a marriage contract. Anthony then comments on how Gray is actually not as stupid as he is rumored to be and asks Dean to share his 2 cents. Dean says Gray only went to the church to pray and play with the kids, so he never got the chance to know him better. Anthony assumes Gray himself brought Shelley along to send them a message, making him realize Irene does not care if Gray stays with her or not. She doesn't even care that Gray is hanging out with Shelley, which can be problematic for the church. They have a paladin whom they know nothing about, and the only person who knows him well just went to war with the previous king. Anthony wonders if they should involve the Pope in this matter, and Dean questions why they haven't involved him already. Anthony explains that receiving direct orders from the Pope shows Anthony does not have control over the very person he nominated as Paladin, which makes him look like the poster child for bad decisions. He then advises Dean to keep a close eye on Gray and find a way to convince Gray to join their cause. Meanwhile, Gray and Shelley are walking home when Gray says he needs to head back to his room. He invites Shelley to join, but she says she's tired and would go back. As the two part ways, Shelley is filled with thoughts of Gray's innocence and her desire to be his sugar mommy. However, she quickly brushes off her sadistic thoughts as she has an important duty to protect Gray from the king and the archbishop. On the other hand, Gray walks into his room and is shocked to see Jimmy, Dora, and Catherine sitting there with gloomy faces. Just then, Vivian reveals herself, claiming she is his guardian demon from now on. Hearing the word demon triggers Gray, who immediately throws his sword at her. Vivian uses Catherine's face to block the hit, realizing she'll need enough patience to last 1,000 lifetimes to manage this brainless wonder. Gray is unfazed and picks up a whole counter to throw at her. Vivian easily dodges, but this is too intense of a welcoming ceremony even for the likes of her. As Gray mindlessly throws lefts and rights at her, she keeps dodging easily until Gray gets frustrated and demands that she stop running away. Vivian actually agrees, but if he had even one functioning brain cell, he would realize no one in their right mind would willingly get punched in the face. Naturally, Gray lets out another attack and Vivian uses Catherine as a shield yet again. Seeing her puke blood, Gray gets terrified and apologizes for being careless. She then asks the two of them to stop fooling around, and Vivian comments that she is merely defending herself from Gray. Gray, still oblivious to every social cue ever invented, asks Catherine to team up with him, thinking their combined stupidity is somehow enough to take down Vivian. When Catherine refuses to help, Gray gets confused because he thinks it's their duty to eradicate all evil, and Vivian has bad written all over her face. Vivian then tells him their realms have signed a peace treaty, and they cannot touch her without breaking that contract. She casually wipes Catherine's blood with her thumb and tastes it just to mock them even harder. Gray is furious and asks Catherine why they made such a pact with the demons, believing they should be fighting them instead. The two explain to this clueless idiot that they used to feel the same way about each other, which led to a war that waged on for thousands of years. In the end, both parties reached a stalemate, which is why they decided to end the pointless fighting. However, Vivian, knowing she could crush Gray without breaking a sweat, dares him to attack if he can actually find where he left his balls. As she demonstrates her powers, Gray feels a strong aura pulling him down to the earth, causing him to fall face first onto the floor. Just then, Catherine grabs Vivian's horns to stop her from using her powers. She asks Vivian if she really came here just to bully Gray, but Vivian reveals she also has a contract with other demons, so she won't dare bully Gray. In fact, she has come here to serve as his guardian demon. Still stranded on the ground, Gray yells out that he will not accept Vivian as his guardian. Even Catherine asks the man to rethink his decision because she believes everyone has some sort of good in them. Catherine explains how Vivian has been raised in the demon world and does not understand the meaning of goodness, but since she has appeared before him, this is an opportunity given to her by the Holy Spirit to walk the right path. For Gray, this is a chance to see if he can handle a redhead Latina with a knack for chaos. Thus, Catherine reluctantly asks Gray to accept Vivian and try the I can fix her approach. Vivian then explains how the Holy Book never forbids a lich from becoming a paladin. Similarly, it does not forbid demons from becoming paladins, which is why Gray must take this opportunity and turn her towards light, which can very well solve the conflict between the two realms. Just as Gray is convinced, Mr. Cat gives him a smack and tells him not to fall for this obvious trick. He explains how Gray turned to light for faith, whereas Vivian is turning to light only to trick him. Just then, Mr. Cat starts floating in the air, courtesy of Vivian's magic, who immediately notices that it is a cat possessed by a ghost. With an evil smirk, Vivian reveals she has contracts with witches and angels, but nothing stops her from attacking the ghosts. Having all 9 of his lives sucked out of him, Mr. Cat quickly changes stances and tells Gray to accept Vivian because anyone can become Paladin if they find good in their hearts. Just then, Catherine reminds him that not even angels have a contract with the ghosts, making him wonder why he is involved in all of this when he can simply be blown away by both parties. As Mr. Cat hides inside Gray's cape, Catherine tells him they cannot get rid of Vivian, so it's better to keep an eye on her than to let her lose. Gray is still not fond of the idea of having to watch over a demon at all times, but he's got no other option. He is willing to accept her as his guardian demon on one condition, that she promises not to do anything to hurt others. Gray gives her an example of how he corrected Jimmy and Dora, who used to drink human blood but have now resorted to pig blood. These two are so terrified of Gray that him merely pointing his finger at them makes them shiver. Vivian then asks them not to worry as she does not drink any blood, prompting Catherine to ask why she licked her blood earlier. Turns out she was just playing around and actually finds blood quite gross. Gray then formally accepts her as his guardian demon and pulls out a book of rules she must follow. Firstly, she will have to act together with Gray, which means she must pray before eating. Not only that, but she will also have to worship in the church with him on weekends. Vivian will also have to attend Catherine's nightly lectures with Gray so they can both receive lessons in divine faith. Vivian puts her cutest face on to show them she won't make any trouble, but Gray knows her ultimate goal is to tempt him to fall, so it's a race between the two. He asks Vivian to play fair, and if she refuses to accept any of these things, he will disband her immediately. Vivian shrugs, asking Gray how she can step into the church without enduring the Holy Spirit. However, Gray reveals that he, a lich, his cat, a ghost, his undead horse, and even Jimmy and Dora, who are vampires, all visit the church every weekend, so he's confident having one more clown in his freight show won't anger the Holy Spirit. Vivian was expecting to get a free pass, but she is not rethinking her choices because Gray takes this stuff very seriously. Seeing her all nervous, Catherine takes a moment to enjoy herself, claiming the Holy Spirit will be delighted to have a demon accept the baptism of the Holy Light. Vivian realizes Catherine is taking her revenge for how she was toyed with earlier, but since both of them are bound by contract and have to be on their best behavior around Gray, they just pretend to awkwardly smile at each other. Gray then excitedly invites Vivian to join their circus of incompetence, and after taking a deep breath, Vivian accepts, knowing all too well her life is going to be very chaotic from now on. Meanwhile, in the king's palace, Benedict learns that the archbishop failed to convince Gray, but his messenger nervously asks for a little more time, hoping Gray would come around. He also mentions how Gray left because he wanted some time to think it over, but Benedict is furious because he, as a king, will have to wait for Gray to make up his mind. Benedict then reveals there are only 2 days left until the official enthronement, and if Anthony fails to convince Gray until then, the royal family will no longer support their reformation. The messenger begs for more time, revealing Gray destroyed his room, which means he is angry. However, Benedict tells the man to get it done in 2 days or find themselves a new puppet. He further reveals how it took the church 20 years to convince his father, the previous king. Benedict thinks he is doing them a favor because he is already willing to accept the church and wants them to pay for those benefits in the form of Gray. He then sends the messenger off, strictly telling him that they only have 2 days to make things right. As the guy leaves, someone puts a hand on Benedict's shoulder and politely tells him not to be hasty just because of a small hurdle. This person is Susan, who asks Benedict to be a little more patient because they have waited long for this time. Benedict argues that he does not want to wait any longer and he must do something or his throne will be in danger. Susan tells him to take a chill pill as he's pretty much wiped out every other candidate, but Benedict reveals he is actually more concerned about Irene. Not only is Irene smart, but she also has a grudge against the royal family. With her huge popularity and the strongest paladin in the country, she can very well aim for the throne and throw Benedict off. Meanwhile, a man enters his stable with a guard to find it in shambles. He is surprised as despite working here for years, he has never seen horses fighting each other in a stud. The guard asks him to simply stop the horses, but the man reveals one of the horses, Tenedos, belongs to the paladin, who is capable of defeating hundreds of knights by himself. The guard is worried because the king's horse is also in the stable, but the man tells him not to worry as they've sent someone to take care of the king's horse. Turns out that someone is a little kid named Bob, who is shocked to see Tenedos beating all the other horses, including the one that belongs to the king. Turns out today is Sunday, and none of the horses prayed to the Holy Spirit, so Tenedos had beaten them up because of it. In horse language, he threatens to continue this if they don't pray on Sundays and before eating grass, and the horses have no choice but to accept the Christian lifestyle. Meanwhile, a fat Discord mod leaves the bar after chugging liquor and finds a young girl sitting by herself with a book in an alley. After eyeing her to his content, the man strolls up to warn her that men like him are why it's unsafe for women to be out late. The girl, who is actually Vivian, looks up to him, and the man proceeds to pull her arm in hopes of taking her home and showing his true colors. Vivian is not allowed to hurt humans as per the peace treaty, but since the fatso made the first move, she can beat the shit out of him without breaking the contract. While she's at it, she reveals Catherine taught her one of the verses from the Holy Book, which was gonna come up in tomorrow's test. She was sitting here for hours to memorize it, but the fatso ended up spoiling her focus. The man immediately starts begging and runs off into his hidey hole. The next day, Gray pulls up the curtains and is delighted to find the sun shining brighter than usual. He decides to perform some of his nightly duties on the streets of the Lion Capital, just like he used to do back home. Just then, Vivian shows up and asks Gray to hurry up. Practice is the real devotion. Just then, Catherine shows up right behind her and reveals Vivian passed the test, but it is quite clear that she is being forced to practice what she memorized. With that, Gray opens up his door, hoping to spread some faith into the streets of the Lion Capital. However, he is shocked to see someone waiting outside his room. Gray immediately shuts the door and asks Vivian if this is a part of her conspiracy, but Vivian claims innocence. Catherine tells him the person outside is the King of Isaac, and Gray accuses Vivian once because he believes she brought him and a demon envoy. Despite Vivian's pleas that she doesn't even know the guy, Gray is suspicious of her and peeks through the keyhole to see what the king is doing. He sees that the king is quite furious for being shut out, but his servants try to salvage the situation by saying Gray must be surprised to see him. Gray then peeks out of the door and asks him if he really is the king, and when he gets a positive answer, Gray shuts the door on him again. However, the king pushes open the door by himself, yelling at Gray to stop joking around as he's come to discuss something important. Meanwhile, Catherine and Vivian hide themselves, unsure of what's going on with him. Later, Benedict apologizes to Gray for barging into his room and then reveals he came here to invite him to a night's play. He heard Gray likes night novels, and since their theater is playing some night-based acts, he thought it would be the perfect opportunity to persuade him to join his side. Gray still believes Benedict is a demon envoy, and spending more time with him will make him understand his intentions, thus he agrees to go. As they head outside, Benedict tells Gray he will be the main character of the story, so he can give any advice regarding the story and even change it according to his liking. Gray is extremely flattered by this gesture and begins sharing his idea for the story. Meanwhile, Irene learns that Duke Fernandez has invited her to a ball he's hosting at his mansion in the Lion Capital. This ball is going to be bigger than the one Benedict held because the entire nobility of the royal capital is expected to attend. Additionally, Duke Tangier's wife has invited her to a tea party with no less than 50 people. Irene comments on the balls of Tangier, who refused the troop deployment order from the previous king, and now he's holding parties in the capital. Abby tells her the Duke himself is not showing up, but his wife and son are both here. In addition to the two ducal families, there are invitations from 32 other families, all of whom want Irene to be their guest. Gregory comments that all the nobles with some sort of power in the capital have all started to make their move and are hoping to cash in on Irene's popularity. However, Abby reveals that nobles from all over the kingdom have an eye out for Irene, and all the invitations are focused on the time before Benedict's enthronement. None of those nobles have invited the royal family into their parties, meaning they are against Benedict's enthronement. Irene asks Gregory to share his 2 cents, and he confirms that the nobles are trying to start a movement in the kingdom of Alan due to the all-time low of the royal family. Gregory states that if he was not sitting here, he would have sent her an invitation too because he wants to capitalize on this opportunity as well. When Irene asks why, he reveals it would be to test if she guards the throne or if she conspires against it for revenge. Irene realizes that the king must fear her as well, so Gregory asks her to carefully think of her next move. The future of this country lies in her hands now, and it is up to her if she wants to remain loyal to the royal family or cast them aside and take the throne for herself. Meanwhile, Gray has finally finished up his story for the play, and now it's time for it to be written down. Once upon a time, there was a little lich that lived underground. It had never seen the sky, and the tumbling lava was its world. One day, he made a serious mistake, So he escaped to the world above to escape the wrath of the other liches. This was the first time he saw the bright sky, and he found it so beautiful that he decided to stay here. Thus, he wore armor and a helmet and pretended to become a knight. Even though it was a bit clumsy, he kept his knighthood and firm faith in the Holy Spirit. The Lich was upright and pious, thus loved by everyone. Finally, even the Holy Spirit discovered its existence. Just then, the writer interrupts, just to make sure everything Gray says is correct. He then assumes that the Holy Spirit must have burned him to death upon discovering him. But Gray reveals the Holy Spirit actually recognized the good in the Lich's heart and made it a paladin. The writer goes silent for a moment, only to assume that Gray is making fun of him. He claims such a thing can never happen even in the wildest imagination, as no one would like to see a Lich pretending to be a good guy and then becoming a paladin. Meanwhile, back in the mansion, Irene states that she does not like war, but Gregory reminds her that she has the strongest army in the whole kingdom. With such power in her hands, people have naturally started fearing her and even suspect her of betraying the royal family. Irene explains how Benedict's first order was to reduce the taxes, and now he is working to repeal some of the unjust laws of the old days. Despite everything he's done to persuade her, Irene believes Benedict is kind at heart. However, Gregory claims Benedict does not have the support of the great nobles, which is why he is acting like a saint, hoping to win over lesser nobles and commoners. Irene comments that a hero cannot fight against kindness, leaving Gregory speechless. She explains how Gray is a paladin who came out of the holy light and swung his sword at the darkness, but under no circumstances will he ever point his sword at a kind king. She then asks Abby to decline all innovations, thus declaring her loyalty to the throne. Gregory has received some invitations as well, so Irene asks him to do as he sees fit and stop worrying about her. Meanwhile, Mr. Cat is scolding Gray because he pretty much used his entire story for the play. Catherine and Vivian are now acting as a devil on one shoulder and an angel on the other, both giving him their own opinions on the matter. Gray explains how despite the concerns, he feels bad because people trust him and he has been lying to them about his identity. The Holy Spirit has given him a choice. If he can expose himself without getting crushed by the people, they will truly accept him. Thus, Gray hopes that one day he can take his helmet off and walk freely without looking like a cheap Halloween decoration. Seeing his dream of having a normal life, Catherine realizes Gray was never scared of exposing his identity, but rather looking for ways to make people accept him. Catherine still wants Gray to be very careful, but Vivian, on the other hand, says he can't really be a true paladin until he is able to stand in the sunlight without hiding himself. Catherine scolds her for encouraging Gray, but she claims this is the objective the Holy Spirit has set for him. Catherine continues to explain how things will go to shit if Gray takes his helmet off, but Vivian uses this as another opportunity to mock the Holy Spirit. She comments on the irony of the situation, as no matter how good and kind Gray is, he will still be a vermin in the eyes of the Holy Spirit, never to see the light of the day. That evening, Gregory meets Duke Fernandez, who is delighted to meet him. He was certain Gregory wouldn't turn his invite down because they are in-laws. Gregory notices how the ball is not just for nobles because many merchants have joined as well. Turns out, these rich folks are all tired of materialistic things and pleasures, and would happily spend money for a chance to become aristocrats. Gregory asks him if he plans on raising funds at this juncture, but Fernandez tells him not to play a fool. Gregory then gets straight to the topic and tells him that Lady Irene has no intention of taking the throne and doesn't even want to infringe on the interests of the royal family. Fernandez is relieved to hear this because he just wants her to stay neutral in all of this. However, Gregory mentions that Irene isn't interested in staying neutral as well, prompting Fernandez to label him as an immature young girl. He is concerned about the people who can manipulate her into siding with them, leaving Gregory speechless. Fernandez then asks him not to worry as he won't pit him against Irene. He then asks if Gregory would like to meet Duke Tangiers, which shocks him because he had no idea Tangiers was here. Meanwhile, Catherine and Vivian are watching the ball from a distant tower, and Vivian is bored because not only did Catherine force her to come, but she is not even saying a word now. Catherine then asks her why she is encouraging Gray to reveal his identity, and Vivian claims it is his own idea while she is just being a supportive guardian. Catherine loudly yells that Gray is still just a child, so Vivian accuses her of luring an uninitiated child into a path she has carved out for him. She calls it shameful how the Holy Spirit is using a mere child as a tool to spread faith, but Gray does not have the same amount of faith as Catherine. In fact, he is just following a dream that he imagined by himself with the help of Catherine. Vivian accuses Catherine of urging Gray to wear that armor forever and always be her paladin, but Gray himself might not feel the same way. They both know that dreams can be shattered any day, and Gray will wake up from his when he learns that the Holy Spirit is not what he thinks it is. One day, he will be smart enough to understand that his dream is unattainable, and that's when he will have a choice. He can either continue to serve as a paladin and choose the angels, or he can go back to being a lich and side with the demons. Despite that, Catherine believes that once Gray's dream is shattered, he will still see the warm light instead of sinking into the darkness. Meanwhile, Gray is busy doing his nightly duties in the capital when Mr. Cat asks him if he will really reveal his identity. Gray says that's his ultimate goal, which he knows won't be easy, but a few steps in the right direction, and he can get there one day. Mr. Cat asks him what his plans are, and the man reveals he just wants to walk the path of justice and carry out the spirit of knighthood. Nearby, Benedict is with his servants and comments on how he felt happy when they were watching the play, but now he feels lost. He then asks his servants to ask about Gray's preferences so he can impress him. He knows that having control over Gray can solve most of these problems, as no one would want to face a paladin in battle. Meanwhile, Zelda and Tarvia are watching this from the skies and are preparing something sinister. Tarvia explains that Vivian has already distracted Catherine, and now it's their time to shatter the sweet dream of Gray. In the stables, Bob and another man are busy doing their work when a guard arrives and tells them that the king and Gray have returned to the city. They want someone to take care of their horses, prompting Bob to take responsibility. Meanwhile, Shelley is walking around the corridor when he notices pastors waiting outside Gray's room. She calls them out to ask what they are up to, and Dean reveals he is unable to find Gray. Shelley mentions that he must have gone out as he's someone who cannot stay put. Gray and Benedict then arrive at the stables, and the guard calls out for someone to take their horses. Just then, Bob comes running out, and the guards are shocked to see him as if he's a ghost or something. As Bob takes Tenedos' leash, Benedict suddenly yells at the boy and asks him what he is doing here. Bob is terrified and starts shivering, which confuses Gray as he cannot understand why the king would yell at a young boy. Mr. Cat's senses kick in, and he knows instantly that this situation's about to get messier than a litter box after taco night. Back in the mansion, Dean asks Lady Shelley if she can help locate Gray, claiming he has some urgent matter to discuss. However, Shelley boldly asks them if this is about Anthony wanting Gray to side with them. Dean is speechless, so Shelley asks him why they are so confident about persuading Gray, knowing all too well he is not the type. She tells them she was there when the war happened, and when Gray became a paladin, he was not related to the Holy Order at all. Now that he is a paladin, he has no reason to comprise and side with the church, even if the Holy Synod orders it. Dean gets nervous and claims they are doing everything in the name of the Holy Spirit, but Shelley sarcastically mentions that none of them have even seen this Holy Spirit before. Back at the stables, Bob apologizes to Benedict for showing up, claiming he had to come out because there was no one else in the stables. Gray notices him shivering and asks if he's cold, and Mr. Cat points out that he must be sick because he is wearing a rag in this cold weather. Gray then casually takes the robe off of his armor and puts it around Bob to protect him from the cold. Benedict yells out that he shouldn't be kind to this kid, but Gray is clueless and asks him why not. Catherine and Vivian are watching them from a distance, and Catherine asks her who that boy is. Vivian explains that this boy Bob is the 12th son of the previous king and Benedict's youngest brother. Bob is the only survivor of the last fight for the crown, and if Gray were to find that out, he would never support Benedict for being so cruel to his own brother. As Gray cares for the boy, Benedict tells him not to bother himself with a stable boy and return to his room where he will receive a gift. However, Gray does not care and asks Benedict to look at the boy because he clearly needs help. Just then, Catherine shows up and tells Gray to leave this place immediately as it is a trap set by the demons. Gray asks her if Bob is also a demon in Voy, but Catherine promises to explain everything and urges him to leave the scene at once. Gray is confused but decides to follow Catherine and leaves the area. As soon as he makes some distance, Benedict orders his men to execute Bob and throw his body into the river. If anyone asks, they'll tell them Bob died of starvation. As Gray walks away, Bob begs Benedict to forgive him just this once, and his screams are heard by the paladin. Back in the mansion, Shelley explains that Gray might seem innocent, but he is not stupid. He is a firm believer in justice, and if he sets his mind to something, Not even the Holy Spirit can stop him. Just then, Gray turns around and throws his sword toward the guards who are carrying Bob, his eyes filled with rage to fight this cruelty. He then orders the guards to stop and asks them what they are doing to the boy. Benedict claims they are merely playing with him, but even someone as stupid as Gray can tell that Bob is terrified and asking for help. He walks up to Benedict and asks with authority if the boy has committed a crime, but Benedict tells him no. Gray sternly asks why they want to take Bob's life if he is innocent, and orders the guards to put the boy down. Gray then walks up to him and tells him he's safe, promising that no one will hurt him as long as he is around. He does not understand why Benedict can't stand a little boy and decides to take him along to make him a squire. Benedict is shocked and asks Gray if he really wants this, and Gray, unaware of Bob's status, confirms that he will raise him on his own. Benedict finally loses his cool and refuses to let Bob be raised by Gray, revealing that he is actually his brother. Gray had heard the word brother in the city, and he understands that it means Bob and Benedict are related by blood. He finds it even weirder because all the brothers he's seen so far have been supportive of each other. He says he's never seen an older brother bully the younger one and asks him if they really are related, making Benedict think Gray is being sarcastic. Gray probably doesn't even understand what sarcasm is, and all he's basing this on is the fact that Benedict ordered his men to game end Bob earlier. He is sure these two are not related and tells Bob not to worry, as he will be his brother from now on. As Gray carries him away, Benedict grabs him by the shoulder and tells him he cannot take Bob away. However, Gray gives him the bombastic side-eye and calls him an inexplicable person. He calls him out for trying to execute a child who didn't do anything wrong, and then claiming that he is his brother. He further insults him because Benedict doesn't want Gray to take care of this boy. And while Catherine is sweating, Vivian is enjoying the show wholeheartedly. Meanwhile, Benedict is furious, but he has no choice but to embrace the insults since he so desperately wants Gray to like him like pygmy that he is. Even Mr. Cat tells Gray to calm down a little, but Gray is absolutely disgusted at the king and takes his leave with the boy. As he walks away, Benedict starts questioning the church's motive and orders his men to gather troops in the capital. Just then, Catherine shows up and tells Gray that he is now in deep shit. However, Gray has a bone to pick with her too, because she said it was a trap set by demons, when in reality, Benedict was about to eat a child. He sternly tells her that he cannot allow this to happen as a knight of justice, and Vivian quickly shows up to back him up in hopes that he will come to hate this Holy Spirit order. Catherine shuts her up and explains that human society, especially the nobility, is way more complicated than he thinks. She further reveals that Bob is the king's younger brother, meaning he also has the right throne. This means that both Benedict and Bob are qualified to become the king of this country. However, Gray knows the current king is already going to take the throne, so he cannot understand why Benedict feels the need to target a child. Catherine says it is because of him. She explains how Gray is not a paladin and represents the Holy Spirit, so if he helps the child, the Think will think the church wants Bob to take the throne. This is why he wants to make sure Bob is removed from the equation. From the moment he helped Bob, he fell into the demon's trap who took advantage of his kind nature. Gray claims he does not want Bob to become the king, and eliminating him for such a petty reason seems so stupid. However, Mr. Cat explains that it does not matter what Gray wants because the king will take action according to what he thinks is right. Benedict is threatened by Bob, so he will take his life as this has been the tradition in humans for thousands of years. Since this is so common, even Catherine and Irene won't call it out. But Gray is furious as this is unacceptable to him. Catherine explains how the world is an unjust place, and this isn't the first time King Benedict has executed one of his own. Not only has he executed his brothers, but in fact, he has taken out every single person who had a right to the throne. Bob, an 8-year-old boy, is the only survivor, but no, he wants to take him out too. Gray realizes that Benedict is a butcher and questions how the church can stand with such a monster. Catherine explains that Benedict, despite his butchery, can bring stability to this country, and reveals how he's already reduced taxes. Because of him, many people who couldn't afford food are now living stable lives. Those who couldn't survive the winter now have enough money to afford warm clothing. Despite Gray's good intentions, his efforts to save Bob will cause suspicion on the king's part, who might send the troops directly to the church. If the king and the church fight against each other, the country will turn into a circus act gone wrong, which will ultimately cause the death of many innocent people. To avoid such fate, all Gray has to do is return Bob to the king, and even though Bob will be executed, Catherine promises that she will personally deliver his soul to the heavens. Gray goes speechless for a moment, and then asks her what the kingdom of heaven is like. Catherine tells him it's a magical land where everyone's happy and sorrow doesn't exist, the exact opposite of his pathetic life. Gray questions if it snows in heaven, and Catherine tells him it is warm all year round in heaven. Gray then inquires about the food in heaven, but Catherine tells him there is no need to eat over there, meaning there are no chocolate milkshakes or Shelley's favorite sundaes. He then asks if there are flower fields, nice clothes, cats, or nightly novels in heaven, but Catherine remains silent as none of those things are present in heaven. Gray then comments that heaven is the same as the place he was born, and Catherine is speechless because, well, he's kind of right. Gray mentions how Bob is just a young boy who still hasn't seen a lot of good things on Earth, much like Gray himself. And since Catherine herself said that Bob is innocent, Gray cannot bring himself to watch the kid die. Catherine tries to explain to him that sparing Bob can cause a bigger disaster, but Gray believes Bob has no part to play in it, and the blame will solely fall on Benedict. Catherine finally accepts that she cannot convince Gray, so instead, she offers a solution to resolve this conflict. She wants Gray to chat with the Holy Spirit, so he can beg the head honcho of this dumpster fire for a miracle. Meanwhile, Benedict has assembled his army in the capital, but even his own knights are advising him not to go against a paladin. However, Benedict is under the impression that Gray wants to steal his throne, so he will do anything to secure his seat, even if it means going against the Holy Spirit. The only way he will stop is if Gray hands him Bob on a silver platter, but that's not going to happen. Meanwhile, Catherine takes Gray to the church and asks him to pray alongside her, revealing that the Holy Spirit listens to everything they say. The two then begin their own individual prayer, starting with Catherine, who asks for forgiveness and tells the Holy Spirit that Gray wants to save a child. She reveals how saving this child will mean the papacy is actively interfering with the kingship of human nations, which can destroy the foundation of their faith. She further reveals how this is a sinister trap set by the demons, and if they were to interfere in the internal affairs of human politics, those who are in power would think that the Holy Synod is always aiming against them. This will deal a heavy blow to the Church's reputation, which they have kept for 10,000 years. Once the war breaks out, Catherine fears that Gray's identity will be revealed, but Gray is a righteous knight who does not deserve this end. With the demons pulling the strings, everything will go into a deep shit, so she wants to know if she should stop Gray by force or let him do what he wants. As for Gray, he too asks for forgiveness and reveals he wants to save a child. He knows this will cause trouble to the Holy Spirit, but he cannot turn a blind eye to such an evil act, as it would be trampling on his faith. Bob is sinless, and Gray has made a vow to protect the weak without violating the law of God. He also mentions how some people treat these vows as mere words, but to him, they are something that must be fulfilled at all costs. He explains how justice does not depend on the recipient, and no matter how small or big someone is, they should be treated the same way. If the divine faith cannot bring justice to a child, what else can humans expect to bring to the world? Gray claims he does not fear death as it is his origin, but what he fears is the collapse of his faith, which is why he is willing to fight until he meets death again. He knows it will cost a lot to protect the faith, but if the price is him, he does not have any regrets. While this is going on, Irene watches the troops marching in the capital, which shocks her. On the other hand, Gregory and Fernandez are still at their party, making them wonder what in the world is going on. Bob is left in the care of Vivian, who tries to assert herself as Bob's older sister. Bob asks her if Gray really wants to protect him, and Vivian tells him not to worry as Gray is a man of his word. Bob is still worried because his brother is literally the king who has a large army under his command, but Vivian mentions that Gray is quite powerful too, and reminds him that he defeated 100,000 men from the previous king's army. However, even Bob knows that Gray only managed such a feat due to Catherine's help, but since she doesn't want him to save the kid, Bob wonders if Gray can really protect him. Vivian tells him that the two are currently discussing this matter, and Gray won't give up on him because he's stubborn. Just then, they notice the army in the streets, which has surrounded the church. With things going exactly as she planned, Vivian is eagerly waiting for the to go down. Meanwhile, Shelley and Dean are thrown into a room with Irene and Abby, and the guard asks them to stay inside this room until the situation is resolved. Shell is furious and asks him what the hell is going on, but Irene asks her to calm down. She herself does not know the exact details, but her intuition tells her that Benedict must have had a fallout with Gray, which is why he's going batshit crazy. She panics and asks Irene about Gray's whereabouts, only to learn that Gray is on a mission to find God. She then notices Jimmy and Doris sitting by the window, but Irene tells her not to fear them as they are atoning for their sins as adopted children of Gray. She then questions what they should do next, and Jimmy decides to scout the area to see what's going on. He asks the rest to stay put, because if anything happens to them, Gray is going to give him hell. On the other hand, Gregory is furious, realizing that the king is hunting the Paladin, who is their only hope against the neighboring countries. Fernandez does not understand why Gray would snatch Bob from the king, which leads him to believe that Irene is going after the throne. Gregory was fully convinced that she had no such aspirations, so he decides to visit her immediately to understand the situation. Meanwhile, Benedict and his men are waiting outside the church, ready to swarm Gray as soon as he leaves. Inside, Gray and Catherine are saying their prayers when they both suddenly hear the Holy Spirit's voice. Firstly, it reminds Catherine that the angels honor the faith, not the power that drives it. What Gray believes in is the purest and most primitive form of faith. She is told not to stop Gray, as it would only make him go against them. The survival of the faith is always accompanied by bloodshed and sacrifice, just like in their war against the demons. Thus, Catherine is asked to have faith in the knight she chose and observe, just as they have for millions of years. On the other hand, the Holy Spirit tells Gray that it can't support his whims, but his faith is party radiant and it can't stop him from insisting. If he chooses to save the child, he alone will bear the consequences that will result from it. There is a solid chance Gray's identity will be exposed and people will hate him, causing him to lose everything he possesses now. Even if his faith is sacred, the world will still treat him as some evil monster, just like they did with Abbotsford. The worst part of all of this is that even if Gray succeeds, he will not receive any praise from the Holy Spirit. Thus, the Holy Spirit asks Gray if he still wishes to proceed with his plan. Without any hesitation, Gray replies that he's willing, and then tells Catherine that he's got the green light from the Holy Spirit. Catherine tells him she is told to observe and can't lend him her powers, but Gray does not care as he has his own ways. Gray then produces a blue flame at his plans, promising to protect the child while trying his best to avoid war. Seeing the soul fire, Catherine is shocked, wondering what Gray is planning. In a white city, several undead Gray had created during the war have risen. Gray knows the Holy Spirit wants to save the child but can't, thus he will do it himself. The undead knights in the white city, including the Shadow One here, is calling to the north and charge at full speeds. Meanwhile, Jimmy is scouting the area, Gregory is heading to meet Irene, and Vivian is watching over Bob. Zelda is standing atop the church, serving as a conductor to this core that may change the world completely. Just then, Anthony comes running out of the church and asks the king why he's surrounded the church with his troops. Benedict has no time for chit-chat and simply asks them to hand over Bob, which confuses Anthony. He tries to play it off as a misunderstanding, but Benedict believes everything Gray does is per instructions from the church. Anthony tries to reason with him by saying that they do not approve of Gray's actions, stating that Benedict is the right person to rule the kingdom and the gospel of the church. He sincerely asks Benedict to give them some time so they can rectify this situation, but Benedict uses this as an opportunity to rally his troops behind him. He asserts that he is the right person to rule this kingdom, and that the Paladin's actions are not in line with the church. He then injects the thought that Gray is actually a fake Paladin who has not received any blessing from the Holy Spirit. Anthony realizes the king is trying to overthrow the church and asks him to rethink his choices, but Benedict orders his men to capture the archbishop and execute him. Anthony continues to plead with him not to do such a thing or he will be punished by the Holy Spirit. But Benedict's hunger for the throne is so large that he does not care about anything else at this point. As Anthony is being carried away, Jimmy comes running in on a horse and snatches him away from the guards, which naturally leaves Benedict furious. Anthony recognizes Jimmy as the adopted son of Gray, and Jimmy asks him to explain everything. Anthony tells him that Gray has taken Prince Bob, but that's all he knows. Jimmy then heads towards Vivian's location and asks her for a better explanation, who tells him they are in conflict with the king. Just then, Benedict orders his archers to shoot at Jimmy, who is forced to use his powers in defense. However, even before the arrows can reach him, they are all deflected away, and Jimmy is shocked to sense a strong aura coming from within the church. Both he and the army are terrified as Gray finally steps out of the church in the most final boss fashion. Menacingly walking toward Benedict, Gray says he is already aware that the king executed 6 of his brothers too, and now wants to take out the last one. He also knows Benedict did this to make sure the throne is secured and the country is stable. Gray accepts this explanation and promises to take away Bob, so he does not threaten Benedict's throne. He asks if Benedict will spare Bob under those conditions, but Benedict proposes a promise of his own. He asks Gray to hand over Bob and promises not to execute him, but quickly loses his cool and lets out his true intentions. Realizing he cannot reason with the king, he asks Jimmy to protect Anthony and Bob at all costs. He also advises him not to hurt humans and instead use his hypnosis to subdue them. As he marches forward, he hears a voice that asks him to stop. This voice comes from Mr. Cat, who hopes on his shoulder, claiming this is a big battle and Gray needs him by his side. Gray explains to him that it might not end well, but Mr. Cat is used to things getting messed up with Gray around. He doesn't know if Gray is doing the right thing or not, knowing all too well everyone is prone to mistakes. Despite that, he wants to be by Gray's side for some moral support. With that, Gray declares to bring justice to Benedict, for the 6 brothers he executed, and for Prince Bob. As Gray marches in, Benedict pulls his sword out, accusing Gray of using a Bob for his own gain. He thinks Gray wants to take over the throne and is manipulating Bob to get to it. He is also under the impression that Gray is a fake Paladin, which means he will not receive any power from the Holy Spirit. Without those powers, Benedict thinks Gray is useless and cannot stand up to him and his giant army. Gray confirms that he really does not have the blessings of the Holy Spirit right now, but the Holy Spirit has consented to this war. The higher-ups will not interfere in this war, which means Gray and Benedict can fight fairly in front of the world for their different ideals. As they two charge toward each other, Gray swings his fist toward Benedict, who barely dodges it. Gray is then surrounded by dozens of spearmen who begin poking at Tenedos. However, he does not falter and knocks them down one after the other. Zelda and Tarvia are watching the battle from a distance, and Tarvia comments on how Gray has enveloped himself in a 3-fold defensive buff. Zelda questions why he is taking a defensive stance given he can go on the offense and easily defeat these humans. Tarvia explains how Gray does not want to hurt humans, and although every strike from his weapon is fierce, none of the soldiers have received mortal wounds. She believes Gray attached debilitating magic to his weapon, so everyone he hits loses the ability to fight for some time without endangering their lives. Zelda calls him naive, claiming Gray cannot win like this and won't even reach the king this way. Gray is also aware of this, but his determination is so strong that he will find a way to win. Pointing with his broken sword, Benedict orders his men to take Gray down, which infuriates him as all the king does is hurt people. Scared shitless, Benedict orders his men to bring out crossbows which are stationed at a nearby rooftop. The crossbows quickly load and fire several giant arrows toward Gray, one of which hits directly into his chest. After the impact, a cloud of dust is formed around Gray and the soldiers surround him. From the cloud emerges a heavily injured Mr. Cat, who locates Gray seemingly lifeless against the wall. Mr. Cat tries to move Gray, but despite his best efforts, he does not receive any response from him. Tarvia mentions that all of Gray's ribs and even his spine are fully shattered, and his soul fire is slowly withering away. She states that if Gray had not used debilitating magic, he would have survived this attack easily, but in his current condition, he is as good as dead. Seeing him in this state, Catherine is frustrated and wishes she had tried harder to stop Gray from going against the king. Now, all she can do is watch Gray die as she's been told to observe only. As everyone is watching Gray's life force face away, Mr. Cat hasn't given up and keeps pushing Gray to regain consciousness. He recalls Gray saying that liches always keep their promise and asks him to wake up because he promised to protect Bob. Gray, on the other hand, feels himself falling into an endless void, with no hope for his recovery. The underground is a place where there is neither light nor sound, a land only filled with the heaps of the dead. In this land, a man somehow entered and encountered a little lich. As the two came face to face, the lich tried to attack the man, only to get his head blown off by his sword strike. As the lich ran after his own head, the man realized the walking skeleton was weak and couldn't hurt him. It did not matter how the man got here. What mattered was that he could not escape this place. After roaming around for some time, he decided to build a campfire using bones to keep himself warm. Just then, he noticed the lich from earlier spying on him. The lich quickly hid, but the man took note of his presence and wondered if it would continue to follow him. However, he knew the lich was weak and pathetic, so he decided to keep him around and even gave him a familiar outfit. The Lich began to look pretty human in those clothes, well, except for its skeletal face. The man did not understand how the Lich was able to move like a normal human, but since it had been following him around for a while, the man decided to teach him some things about the human world. First of all, he asked the Lich if he had a name, but the Lich didn't even know the concept of naming things. The man decided to give him a name, and since the Lich was neither alive nor dead, he decided to call him Gray, a color between white and death. This is how the man in gray teamed up in the depths of the underground on an endless journey. Amid their adventure, the man introduced Gray to sugar, a sweet substance that Gray could not taste. This angered Gray, but the man laughed it off and told him that only the living can have the privilege of eating. Gray liked listening to the man's stories about the human world. He told Gray that the sky was a blue lid that stretched infinity, and no matter how hard one tries, one cannot touch it. He also told him about the huge ball of fire called the sun, which wakes up every day from the east and flies to the west to sleep. He also told him about the sea, which is similar to the boundless blue sky. However, a man can touch the sea, unlike the sky. Through the man's words, Gray formed an image of the human world in his head, until one day the man grew tired of walking. He asked Gray to take a break, leaving him confused. The two later lay down on a pile of skeletons, and the man told him that he could no longer continue this journey. He had been wandering for too long, and it was only logical that he gave up and died in peace. Lying here reminded him of his childhood, when he used to lie down with his sister and count the stars. He used to be an orphan besides his sister, and were dependent on each other for survival. One day, a nobleman took a fancy to the sister's beauty and took her by force. The brother was afraid of enduring the nobleman, so he just stood there and watched as his sister was taken away. To console himself, he thought that at least this way, his sister would have food, clothing, and shelter. Unbeknownst to him, the sister was unbearably humiliated and decided to yeet herself from the castle. When the brother learned of his sister's death, he picked up a weapon and charged towards the nobleman to avenge her. However, several spears impaled his body, and he couldn't even reach the nobleman. At that moment, he was filled with deep regret and wished he had not left his sister to go with his jerk in the first place. However, there was no going back now. He then told Gray that one day if he would someone whom he wanted to protect, he should do it at all costs. The man told Gray that even if his bones are shattered, he must take a stand and protect his loved ones. He told Gray not to be stupid like the brother in his story, or he would regret it for the rest of his life. Even after death, his soul would be cursed, and he would never be able to live in peace. As Gray is falling into a deep void, he recalls the man's words and a golden light engulfs his spine. Soon after, his broken bones begin to heal, and his whole body is covered with a warm light. The people around him notice the change in atmosphere, and everyone, including Catherine, Tarvia, Zedla, Vivian, Bob, and Mr. Cat, notices Gray's body shining bright with a golden light. Meanwhile, Dora uses her vampire bats to survey the area and learns that 4 men are guarding the hallway. Additionally, 12 men in 4 groups are constantly patrolling the area, so it's nearly impossible to escape. Irene asks her if she can do anything, but Dora can't actually hurt anyone due to her oath to Gray. However, she still has the option to put them to sleep, which she does. After the guards are taken care of, Irene, Shelley, and Abby climb out of the balcony using a makeshift rope. They plan to meet up with the White City's Court of Honor, who are stationed in the east. Following that, they will head to the church to support Gray. Abby questions if this is really necessary given how Gray managed all by himself against an army of 100,000 men. However, Irene reminds him that Gray only survived that battle thanks to the angel's powers in Anthony's speech. So far, she has not seen any golden light in the sky, which means Gray has failed to gain support from the Holy Spirit. Irene wants to reach the church as soon as possible, but Shelley believes they will need additional backup to fight this battle. Thus, she asks Irene to lend her Abby for a moment so she can think of a route to get out of the capital. Irene questions if this useless idiot will be enough, but Shelley is confident she can use her family connections to secure a safe passage. Soon after, she and Abby arrive at the underground passage, which has been turned into a black market. She then asks Abby to wear a mask, because showing their faces around here might not be the best idea. As they walk together, she reveals there are many ways to leave the capital as long as one's willing to pay. Just then, Shelley shouts at a man to catch his attention, revealing she has a deal for him. The man is rocking in his boat like a badass and recognizes Shelley's voice. This guy is none other than Paz, the leader of the Red Scorpions, who helped Irene in her duel against Count Casper. Meanwhile, Gray has regained some consciousness and is using his soul fire to heal his ribs. The main issue is his broken spine, which will require a lot of strength and delicacy to heal. While he's at it, he feels immense pain and comments that this is the first time he's ever felt it. However, he powers through it like a boss. Pain and hardships are merely trials for a true knight. At the same time, Irene has gathered her men and is heading towards the church, but one of the guards called Poitras questions if this is really the best idea given they are merely a small force compared to the king's army. Irene asks her if he is afraid, but Poitras tells her they are just worried about her safety. However, Irene asserts that Gray is her paladin, and if he falls by the king's hands today, their duchy will be Benedict's next target. The survival of their duchy solely depends on Gray's survival, which is why they must protect him at all costs. Just then, they notice a surge of holy light appearing in the sky. In the meantime, Paz leads Abby and Shelley to a frozen passage that safely leads them out of the capital. Now all that's left is for Irene to do her part. Back at the church, Zelda and Tarvia are shocked to see Gray's body surrounded by golden flames. Lich's soul fire is always blue, and these golden flames smell trouble for the demons. Mr. Cat is initially terrified of the flames, thinking it will burn him, but Gray grabs him and puts him back on his shoulder, making him realize the fire is actually healing their wounds. Meanwhile, the king's army is shocked as they are under the impression that Gray is a fake paladin who no longer has the Holy Spirit's blessing. Benedict realizes his men are losing their morale and orders them to attack Gray before he is healed. On the other hand, Gray clutches onto his sword, promising to judge all injustice. He declares that he will shine the holy light in every corner of the world and eradicate all darkness. Menacingly raising his sword, Gray vows to judge Benedict right here and now, making his army piss their pants. They declare him a monster and are terrified of getting burnt to ashes by the holy fire. Despite that, Benedict refuses to back down and pulls out his bow, aiming to execute the Holy Spirit alongside Gray. As he fires the arrow, it is intercepted by another arrow that breaks it in two. Benedict is left wondering where that arrow came from, and one of his men tells him that they have some uninvited guests at the back. These guests are the Knights of the Silver Moon Order, who are crushing Benedict's back ranks and knocking out everyone in their path. They are strictly told not to take any human lives, as their only goal is to protect the paladin. As chaos unfolds on the battlefield, Benedict's chances start to dwindle, making him wonder how Gray hid such a strong cavalry in the capital without his knowledge. While Catherine is delighted, the demons are frustrated because they completely forgot about the Legion of the Undead in their schemes. Tarvia comments that the battle has already been decided, and there is no point for them to observe any longer. Just then, an angel shows up behind them, menacingly asking where they are headed. As they turn around, they see a high angel behind them, who turns out to be Catherine's teacher Abba. He is upset because the demons have caused a lot of trouble for his disciple, who has just come of age. Meanwhile, Catherine is guiding the Legion of the Undead toward Gray's location, while Irene and her men arrive to see the king's men running in the opposite direction. While this is going on, Mr. Cat notices that Gray has not moved since the time he raised his sword earlier. Gray, at this point, has lost his consciousness for reasons unknown. As the sun rises, Irene's men tend to the injured who were left behind when the king's army followed. They share Gray's pacifist approach and want to take responsibility for those who were hurt in battle. Just then, an adjutant by the name of Carl approaches Irene and salutes her for everything she has done. Irene thought the Silver Moon was just a group of children, but Carl reveals he willingly joined the knightly order after defecting from the king's army some months ago. This is the same guy who posed as Gray and stabbed Irene in the last war, but he's come around now. Irene then asks him if Gray is alright, and Carl tells her he cannot comment on the current situation. Catherine is trying to heal Gray, and no one is allowed to enter the church for now. Inside, the golden flame is still burning inside Gray's body, while Catherine and Abbott watch over him. She asks Abbott what's going on, and the man reveals Gray is transforming into a saint. However, the sacred fire and the body of the undead are repelling each other, and his body is continuously being destroyed and regenerated. She asks if they can do anything to help him, and Abbott replies that they have to wait for Gray to heal his own body. However, they can use some outside help to merge him as soon as possible. Just then, Vivian shows up and Mr. Cat is furious, blaming her for Gray's condition. She claims innocence and then asks the angels how long it normally takes for the powers to merge completely. She keeps mocking them for having no knowledge of Gray's condition, but Abbott realizes they can use her to speed up the process. Vivian uses her dark powers on Gray, explaining that the merging of light and dark will give birth to a new life. Meanwhile, as Irene and her guards form a temporary base, Gregory comes rushing in and asks her to explain her actions. He finds Gray tending to Prince Bob and is shocked as he believes Irene indeed ordered Gray to rescue the kid so she can take the throne. He demands they tell him where Shelley is so he can leave, but Irene tells him to hold his horses and explains everything that happened. Gregory learns that Gray acted on his own to save Bob, which led to this situation. This makes him frustrated as this reckless action is going to have severe consequences, especially because Benedict is recognized by the Holy Synod. There is a chance Gray will be condemned as a heretic by the Holy Synod, and the whole world will denounce him. Realizing the gravity of the situation, Prince Bob takes the blame and apologizes. He says things would have been much better if he had simply died, but Irene gently puts her hand on his head and asks him not to apologize. She recalls how she started blaming herself for being born as a girl, stating that if she was a boy, the former king would have no problem giving her the duchy. In that case, she could have avoided the war which caused the death of thousands of her men. She tells Bob that the Paladin chose him instead of Benedict, so he must chin up and show everyone that he has a right to live with honor. Seeing her being so polite with the boy, Gregory harbors doubt that Irene might be playing him. He initially decides to take the rational approach like he always does, but then his instincts kick in, and he chooses to side with the young ones even if it means taking reckless actions. Meanwhile, the Privy Council, which is the highest core organization of the Holy Synod, holds a meeting regarding the recent events. They comment on how Gray overthrew a king that was approved by the Holy Synod, which will make them look bad. Soon after, the Pope himself shows up and asks them if they have received any news from Anthony. He learns that Anthony refused to give any comments regarding the situation, making him realize that this is bad for their reputation. He decides to seek answers from the Holy Spirit directly, but until then, everyone is told to wait and do nothing. Will Gray manage to complete his transformation into a saint, or will the evil forces finally overpower him? That is it for this video. Leave a thumbs up if you liked the video and subscribe to the channel for similar content. And as always, thanks for watching.